The story begins in the mansion of Duke Adra, where a beautiful girl with pink hair sat across from a cold, ruthless man. She snuck a glance at the man before her, thinking, "Goodness, it's Duke Cassius sitting opposite me, and his gaze feels like it could swallow me whole." I suppose it's understandable, though. In the face of her sweet smile, Duke Cassius asked coldly, "Why did you come without prior notice?" At his words, she took a deep breath, as if trying to compose herself, clutching her skirt tightly. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, then looked at the Duke before her, silently addressing him. "Duke, let's break off our engagement," she declared, momentarily stunning the Duke, who frowned and asked, "What in the world are you talking about?" The pink-haired girl calmly replied, "Duke, neither of us wants this political marriage, do we? It all started a week ago, in the modern world, when a beautiful girl was hit by a truck. It was a traffic accident that claimed her life. When her consciousness awoke from the eternal flow, she found herself in an unfamiliar place. Suppressing her panic, the girl hurriedly got out of bed and searched the room for a mirror. It was a luxurious and magnificent room, everything unbelievably opulent. Grasping her face, the girl cried out, "I can't believe it. I've transmigrated, just like those others. I've actually transmigrated into the body of Ibelia Vane." Speaking of Ibelia Vane, she was a beautiful woman. No, an exceptionally beautiful woman. After marrying Cassius, she became the stepmother of a young boy named Lucius. But due to various circumstances, she became an exceedingly cruel stepmother, and the victim of her cruelty was Lucius. Both Ibelia and Lucius were illegitimate children, but unlike her, he had received love from those around him since childhood, while she was always neglected, treated as an object. Ibelia's jealousy towards Lucius gradually festered within her heart. She believed the boy should be treated as she had been in the past, and slowly, her envy transformed into abusive behavior towards Lucius. Eventually, her misdeeds were exposed, and Ibelia was driven out of the castle, homeless and wandering the streets. In the end, she contracted an infectious disease in a monastery and died there. Readers in the real world cheered for this punishment, satisfied that she received the fate she deserved for her sins. And the girl who transmigrated here, her real name in the modern world was Hannah Dawson. She was also one of those who rejoiced at Ibelia's tragic end. But it wasn't just her. Countless others mocked and cursed Ibelia in the comments. So, why did the Wheel of Fate choose Hannah to transmigrate here? Fortunately, the timing of her arrival gave Ibelia a sigh of relief. She arrived before Ibelia's marriage to Cassius, because breaking off an engagement is much easier than getting a divorce. Ibelia quickly decided that if she didn't want to die miserably like in the original story, she had to treat Lucius well while he was still a boy. But there was a problem. Ibelia had to deal with that man, Duke Cassius, first. Isabella was cold and heartless. She didn't want to marry a man who already hated her. Even if they married, she wouldn't have to worry about food or daily life, but such a life will be no different from hell. So, as she placed her hand on the door of her family home, Ibelia made up her mind. She had to break off the engagement with Cassius and find her own path in life. The light of freedom outside was waiting for her to reach out and touch it. She had to fly far away and never be entangled in this tragic story again. Back in the present, Duke Cassius coldly asked, "Is this the will of Count Vane or your own?" Ibelia quickly replied, "It's my own. Count, my father doesn't know about this." Hearing this, Duke Cassius stood up coldly. "If the Count doesn't know, then there's nothing to discuss. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything. You can go home." He turned to leave, prompting Ibelia to call out in a panic, "Wait." Perhaps out of desperation, she grabbed his hand, but he immediately shook her off coldly. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on Ibelia, but she had to make things clear. "Duke, I know why you agreed to this engagement. My father coerced you into marrying me by offering information you desired. In reality, it was more of a threat." At her words, the Duke's expression hardened further. "Has someone discovered this and demanded the engagement be broken off?" he questioned. Ibelia calmly replied, "I will provide you with that information in my father's stead. In return, let's break off the engagement." Looking at her earnest expression, Duke Cassius voiced his skepticism. "How could a young lady like yourself know about such information?" Ibelia thought to herself, "If I said I transmigrated here from outside this novel, that would truly sound insane." Putting on a distressed facade, she answered, "I cannot reveal the reason, but I can guarantee that the information hasn't been leaked. Only my father and I are aware of it. So, Duke, what is your decision?" Whether her words were true or not, the Duke seemed to waver. He remained silent for a moment before replying, I understand your point. I will consider it. For now, return home. Ibelia had no choice but to leave. How rude. Not even seeing a guest out, just letting them leave on their own, she grumbled internally. Just as she was complaining to herself, a soft voice suddenly called her name. Aunt Ibelia? Standing before her was a shy young boy with flushed cheeks. Auntie, would you like to have some cookies with me? Ibelia was momentarily stunned by the adorable child before her. This child, yes, this child was Lucius. Lucius stood there shyly, asking, would you like to have cookies with me? The nanny beside him gently reminded him, young master, you should greet her first. Why are you talking about cookies right away? All right, he said. It's nice to meet you, Before he could finish, Ibelia offered a warm smile, easing his embarrassment. Hello, young Master Adra. Looking at her gentle, beautiful smile, Lucius was momentarily captivated, his cheeks flushing even deeper. It was the first time anyone had greeted him like that. Her greeting was so different from the others. Lucius asked curiously, Auntie, do you know me? Ibelia bent down and looked at him softly. Of course I do. You look a lot like the Duke. You probably already know, I'm Ibelia Vane. As she spoke, she politely lifted her skirt in a formal curtsy. Then, her gaze dropped slightly, and she sighed. As for the cookies, Ibelia hesitated. If she agreed, she thought young Lucius might get his hopes up. He might start hoping she would become his stepmother. So, Ibelia offered a sweet smile and replied, I'm very sorry, young master, but I already have an appointment, so I can't have cookies with you. Since she had already asked to break off the engagement, Ibelia reasoned, she couldn't give the boy any false hope. Hearing her refusal, Lucius's small hand clutched his shirt tightly as he lowered his head, embarrassed. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I was too forward. Ibelia felt pity for him, but there was nothing she could do. No, young master, I'm the one who should apologize. Well then, I'll take my leave, young master. In the original story, Lucius Adra was Cassius's illegitimate son. In the original work, he was just as cold-blooded as his father, Cassius. Lucius could break the silence in seconds. His cruel nature stemmed from having to face the storm of people's gazes alone throughout his childhood. When Duke Cassius announced to his servants that Lucius would be his heir, not a single person agreed, and they all expressed deep concern. What are you saying, Duke? We need to quickly welcome a duchess to resolve the deficit issue. How can an illegitimate son of common birth become the heir to the dukedom? I understand your affection for the young master, but if you look at the deficit situation, you must reconsider. The chorus of disapproval enraged Cassius, and he slammed his hand on the table. His icy voice rang out, silence. This is my decision. If anyone dares to object, I swear I will have their head. The Duke's terrifying aura and decisively ruthless attitude silenced everyone around him. Not wanting to waste any more time, the Duke stood up. If there's nothing else to discuss, then everyone is dismissed. He gave them a chilling glance and flung the door open, storming out of the room. Meanwhile, poor Lucius had finished weaving a garland of beautiful flowers. Dejected, he wandered into the castle's beautiful garden, but froze when he overheard voices. Hiding behind a pillar, Lucius saw several ladies sitting in the garden, chatting amongst themselves. The young master's mother was a commoner, or worse. Why would Madame think so? Upon hearing the question, the beautiful girl answered smugly, look at the Duke's personality. He would even marry a disgraced noblewoman. But the fact that he only brought back the young master, doesn't that imply the young master's mother is even lower than a commoner? Yes, that's right. Another chimed in with a burst of laughter. If I were to marry the Duke, I would definitely send that child to the academy dormitories. Another woman shook her head, smiling. Oh, you're too kind. If it were me, I'd send him straight to a monastery. This was the reality Lucius had to endure, the storm he eventually faced. After hearing all those hurtful words from outsiders, poor Lucius had only one wish. He prayed many times under the cold moonlight, please give me a mother. That evening, at the Vane estate, Ibelia returned from the Duke's mansion. Assisted by a servant, she stepped down from the carriage and slowly walked towards the house. As she walked through the night, Ibelia's mind was still in turmoil. She wondered if her earlier rejection had made the boy cry. Perhaps she should have just agreed to join him. After all, what harm could come from having a piece of cake and a cup of tea? If this body weren't Ibelia's, she could have taken better care of Lucius. Thinking this, Ibelia suddenly jolted herself awake. Oh no, what am I thinking? I can't keep dwelling on this. I just need to break off the engagement and live my own life. As she entered the house, a cold male voice drifted down from upstairs. Where have you been? Ibelia glanced up, sighing inwardly. She couldn't deal with anyone else's problems right now. The situation in this mansion was already exhausting enough. Standing at the top of the stairs was Derek Vane, her half-brother. Derek looked at her with malice. I asked where you've been. Ibelia wearily lowered her eyes, guessing he was about to taunt her again. How predictable. From another perspective, Ibelia was also a victim of abuse in the original story. Ibelia's mother was a maid in the Vane household, a beautiful maid with pink hair. One day, Count Vane was relentlessly captivated by her extraordinary beauty. That was how Ibelia came to be. Fearing the discrimination she and her daughter would face in the castle, her mother ran away, but soon contracted a cruel, contagious disease. Worried that her poor daughter would be left all alone, she wrote a letter pleading for the Count's help. But when Count Vane received the letter, he flew into a rage. A mere maid dared to run away, and she even had a child. The cruel man originally intended to kill them both, but when he saw little Ibelia, he recognized her potential future beauty. This girl looks a lot like her mother. She might fetch a high price in marriage someday. So he gave the child two options. I'm giving you a choice now. Will you come with me or stay here? If you come with me, I'll call a doctor to save your mother. In reality, Ibelia had no choice in the matter. She had always been a victim in that house, especially when faced with the hatred of Derek, the second son, which was always directed at Ibelia. She didn't respond to him, walking coldly up the stairs, hoping he would leave her alone today. But her indifference seemed to infuriate Derek, and he immediately grabbed her hand tightly. Are you crazy? Ignoring me? The pain in her hand made Ibelia frown, and she shook her head. I have nothing to say to you, so let go of me. I'm too tired today. Derek questioned angrily. You speak to me like that? Ibelia responded firmly. You should address me as sister first. His expression immediately turned indescribable, filled with malice, like a venomous snake. Are you getting arrogant because you're engaged to Duke Adra? But nothing will change. Facing his dreadful expression, Ibelia calmly replied, Why won't anything change? If I marry Duke Adra, I will become the third Duchess of the Empire. So someone like you, who can't even inherit the Count's title. Before she could finish, Derek shoved her angrily, causing Ibelia to fall backward. When the warm sunlight roused her from unconsciousness, she didn't know how much time had passed. Wearily opening her heavy eyes, she stared at the ceiling. Ibelia sat up, rubbing her aching head. She sighed. She'd clearly fallen down the stairs last night. Just then, a maid opened the door and asked with concern, Miss, are you all right? Are you hurt anywhere? That young master Derek pushed you down the stairs. The worried maid was Annie, Ibelia's personal maid. Hearing this, Ibelia cursed inwardly. Damn Derek. The maid brought a bag of painkillers prescribed by the doctor. The doctor had advised her to rest more, and she would feel better. Then, the maid pulled a letter from the bag and handed it to Ibelia. And this is a letter from the Adra family, Mississippi. Ibelia took the letter in surprise. Why would they send a letter now? It turned out to be from the boy, Lucius. To Aunt Ibelia, hello, it's Lucius. My teacher said that to invite a guest, you need an invitation. This time I'll prepare better tea and cookies, so please come visit me. I'll be waiting. Suddenly, a few teardrops, like pearls, fell onto the letter. Ibelia was startled, unsure why she was crying. Looking at the letter in her hand, she felt a heaviness in her heart. Ibelia suddenly remembered a childhood memory from her previous life when she met her stepmother after her mother's early death. You must be Hans Odin? It's a pleasure to meet you. This is a gift for you. Hans Odin, her stepmother's voice was gentle, and she gave her a cute, bunny-shaped hairpin. Little Hans Odin felt so novel and touched, as if the existence of this new mother was a dream. It made her dream of a happy and warm family. She had naively thought so. But one day, Hans Odin overheard her stepmother saying to her father, Honey, what do you think about sending Hans Odin to live with relatives? Our second child will be born soon, and we can't take care of 2 children. If that doesn't work, we can try sending her to a boarding school. I heard the facilities there are very good now. Just like that, poor Ibelia experienced days of being abandoned, unwanted, and unloved. So she knew very well how painful it was, which was why she didn't want to give Lucius false hope. Ibelia sighed and wrote a letter having the maid deliver it to the boy. After completing these tasks, she exhaled and leaned back in her chair. Now, there was that damn Derek. Last night, he had clearly mocked her, cruelly pushing her down the stairs. First, she had to get revenge on Derek and then deal with the engagement with Cassius. One thing at a time. But even if she broke off the engagement, Count Vane would still try to force another one upon her. Ultimately, the most important thing was to get away from Count Vane. With this in mind, Ibelia searched for a simple cloak in her wardrobe. To continue her plans, she needed more money. For now, she had to go to the Information Guild first. She donned the cloak and left the mansion. The letter Ibelia sent quickly reached young Master Lucius at the Duke's mansion. The boy excitedly showed the letter to his nanny. "Look, nanny," Miss Ibelia replied. "Oh, young master, do you need me to read it for you?" Lucius refused, saying he would read it himself. I wonder what she wrote. Full of hope, Lucius read the letter line by line. "To the young master of Adra, I hope this letter finds you well. Like last time, thank you for the invitation to tea, but it seems our schedules don't align, so I won't be able to attend." After reading the letter, the boy was silent for a long time, then sadly asked his nanny, "Nanny, is it because I'm an illegitimate child that both father and Miss Ibelia hate me? Is that why they canceled the engagement?" The nanny, worried, rushed to comfort him. "No, young master, don't think like that. Your father cares about you very much." But these comforting words couldn't calm the boy's emotions. "Nanny, do you think I can persuade Miss Ibelia?" "Of course, young master." "Then, I'll go buy Miss Ibelia a present first." A smile bloomed on the boy's face as he thought of his new plan. No one dislikes receiving gifts, right? So if she receives a gift, will she like me more? Hearing his innocent and hopeful words, the nanny nodded with a mixture of pity and affection. "Yes, young master. Go ahead." A while later, on the bustling street, Ibelia walked while quietly observing her surroundings. "It should be around here." Just then, she heard a somewhat familiar voice and stopped. "Young master, slow down. Hurry up, nanny." Ibelia was surprised to see young Lucius running quickly down the street. Perhaps due to his distraction, he tripped on a stone and fell to the ground. The nanny, startled, rushed over to help him up. "Young master, are you all right?" Seeing the boy fall, Ibelia felt a surge of impulse to go forward, but she restrained herself, telling herself not to care. Just ignore it, walk past, don't get involved. But the compassion in her heart wouldn't allow her to do that. Reluctantly, Ibelia turned to face the boy. Lucius, sitting on the ground, was equally surprised to see Aunt Ibelia, whom he had been waiting for. "Young master, are you all right?" Her appearance made Lucius a little flustered, but mostly happy. "The ground is cold. Young master, get up quickly. You should go back to the Duke's mansion and have your injured leg treated." Hearing her words, Lucius quickly protested. "No, I came to this street to buy you a present, Aunt Ibelia." Ibelia sighed helplessly. "Young master, why are you worrying about presents? Your health is much more important than a gift." Feeling her genuine concern, Lucius's eyes moistened, and he mustered the courage to ask again. Then, "Aunt Ibelia, will you come with me today? I really want to invite you for tea." Left with no choice at this point, Ibelia couldn't refuse such a sincere invitation. She accompanied the boy to the Duke's castle and joined the tea party that had already been prepared. The table was laden with delicious desserts and beautiful juice glasses. Ibelia thought to herself, "When did I have time to do such a thing?" Young Lucius enthusiastically and repeatedly recommended all the delicacies he had prepared. Ibelia tasted them, but her mind was still in turmoil. Unable to contain her curiosity, she asked, "Young master, why are you so insistent on inviting me for tea?" Young Lucius blushed for a moment, then answered frankly, "I want you to be my mother." Ibelia remained silent, listening, feeling both surprised and unsure how to react. Finally, all her thoughts coalesced into a sigh. "Young master, I'm truly sorry, but I can't be your mother." Lucius asked worriedly, "Is it because I'm an illegitimate child?" Ibelia looked down at the boy and shook her head. "No, that's not the reason." Just as she was about to continue, the door behind her suddenly opened. Duke Cassius appeared, asking coldly, "Miss Vane, what are you doing here?" Seeing his father, a look of panic immediately spread across Lucius's face. Ibelia thought to herself that his strong reaction was understandable, especially considering the reason an illegitimate daughter like Ibelia was able to get engaged to Duke Eldorado was because of a secret involving Lady Vane, which forced the Duke into a corner, having to marry her daughter. That secret was about Lucius not being Duke Cassius's biological son. Within the Eldorado family, there was a forbidden name, an old portrait veiled in layers of mystery. That name was Julia Eldorado, Duke Eldorado's eldest daughter, Cassius's biological sister. Under the guise of raising an heir, Cassius had to watch his sister endure their father's abuse, unable to save her. But every time he felt helpless, his poor sister would comfort him. "It's okay, don't cry, Cassius. It's not your fault." In their family, Julia was the only one treated unfairly. As time passed, they both grew up and attended different academies. Cassius had been secretly pleased, thinking that his sister Julia had finally escaped their father. Cassius felt a brief surge of immense relief, but then a tragedy he could never forget unfolded. "Sister, what happened?" His poor sister lay collapsed in a room awash with blood. "Did father do this again?" Cassius asked, knowing their father had abused her since childhood. Facing her brother, she could only manage a weak smile and shake her head. Upon discovering Julia's pregnancy with a child of unknown paternity, the Duke flew into a rage, subjecting her to repeated abuse. Cassius, aware of this truth, continually tried to shield his sister from their father's cruelty. Many times, his beautiful sister thanked him with a smile. "Thank you, Cassius, for protecting me and my child." Later, this beautiful but unfortunate woman died due to complications from childbirth. Cassius worried that after her death, she would be shamed for bearing an illegitimate child. To overturn this disgrace and protect his deceased sister's honor, Cassius decided to claim Lucius as his own son, while abandoning the search for Lucius's biological father. 1 year ago, on a stormy night at the Eldorado mansion, young Lucius suddenly developed a high fever that couldn't be controlled. Deeply worried, Cassius rushed to his bedside. "Your Grace," the young master suddenly started convulsing. Hearing the family doctor's words, the Duke asked sharply, "What convulsions? This child has never had this before. What's going on? And what is that symbol?" With that, the Duke pointed to a strange sun and moon symbol on the boy's chest, which was glowing intensely. The doctor sighed and shared a speculation. "This isn't just an ordinary fever, Your Grace. This could be the result of a curse." The symbol on the young master's chest is a mark that appears when the family curse is passed down through generations. "It seems the curse has been inherited." "What do you mean?" Cassius asked coldly, already having a sense of what was happening. There was no other possible explanation except a curse stemming from Lucius's biological father. The poor boy had inherited his father's bloodline, and with it, the accompanying curse. Cassius could only sigh helplessly, his heart in turmoil. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any useful information. As time passed, the clues about the curse became increasingly vague, until one day, Countess Vanessa arrived at the Duke's mansion, wearing a triumphant smile. "Your Grace, you must know why I'm here today. I want to talk about young Master Lucius's true parentage." Hearing these words, the Duke pressed his lips together and clicked his tongue. "What nonsense are you spouting? Lucius is my biological son. Don't speak such absurd words." Hearing this, Countess Vanessa maintained a faint smile on her lips. "After all, Lucius's biological mother is your sister, Miss Julia Eldorado." Seeing Duke Cassius's cold expression, Countess Vanessa pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and waved it in front of him. "The owner of this strand of golden hair is Lucius's biological father. By the way, I have a good suggestion for you, Duke. If you agree to marry my daughter, Ibelia, I promise to keep all of these secrets for you. But if you refuse, then all these truths will be made public." It was a blatant threat, and the Duke had no choice but to agree. Finally, it was Ibelia who requested to break off the engagement in exchange for information about Lucius's biological father. So it was natural for him to be wary of her when she met with Lucius. Ibelia hadn't planned to explain today's meeting, but young Lucius spoke first. "Father, Miss Ibelia did nothing wrong. I was the one who invited her." Hearing this, the Duke responded coldly, ordering the boy back to his room. Seeing his father's attitude, Lucius seemed frightened and wanted to say something, but Ibelia interrupted him. "Young master, please return to your room. I have something to discuss with the Duke." After Lucius left, Cassius repeated his question. "Why did you come here without my permission?" Ibelia replied softly that she had run into the young master by chance in town, and he had invited her for tea, so she came. "It seems my presence has soured your mood, Duke." She rose, gathering her skirts. "If you're feeling uncomfortable, I'll take my leave." As she stood, a red wound on her arm was inadvertently revealed, instantly catching the Duke's sharp gaze. "Wait!" Before she could react, the Duke grasped her slender arm, startling her. Looking at the wound, the Duke asked irritably, "How did you get this injury? Was it Countess Vanessa?" Caught off guard, Ibelia tried to avoid his gaze, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't her." The Duke, unsatisfied, pressed further. "Then was it your brother?" Unsure why he was asking such questions, Ibelia sighed. "Duke, this is something you needn't concern yourself with. After all, we're about to break off our engagement." Duke Cassius disagreed. "What do you mean, needn't concern myself? I haven't agreed to break off the engagement yet. You are still my fiancé, which means I have the right to ask such questions." Seeing his stern and indifferent demeanor, Ibelia smiled bitterly to herself. He hadn't even treated her like a fiancé before, so why the sudden concern now? Ibelia searched for an excuse closest to the truth. "I simply fell down the stairs yesterday, that's all. May I leave now?" The Duke's large hand slowly released her arm. "Very well," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'll have a carriage prepared for you." "Very well, I'll have a carriage prepared for you." Moments later, on his way back to his own chambers, the Duke's agitation hadn't subsided. A thought struck him, and he stopped abruptly, staring into the middle distance. "Logan," he commanded, "quickly investigate how she's being treated at that estate." With his experience, Cassius judged that the wound looked suspiciously like the result of violence. If his suspicions were correct, he couldn't simply ignore it. The carriage carrying Lady Ibelia departed the Duke's castle under the beautiful setting sun. "Please take me to Crone Road," Ibelia instructed the coachman. The coachman replied awkwardly, "But my lord instructed me to return you to the Vanessa estate. I have business there, so please do me this favor this time." At her insistent request, the coachman had no choice but to take her to Crone Road. After some searching, Ibelia located a shop that matched her memory. This must be the place. A shop devoid of customers, with only a single man standing behind the counter. Ibelia's slender, white hand tapped lightly on the table. She looked up, a lethal smile playing on her lips. "A slow gin fizz with lemon and ice, please." Slow gin fizz was a popular cocktail in the Empire, but in this particular bar, it held another meaning. It was the code phrase for the clandestine intelligence guild, Zero. The secret code of the Zero Intelligence Guild. 13 years after his mother's death, and after Duke Cassius's passing, Lucius discovered the secret of his birth. As a young adolescent, his emotions were incredibly volatile, and at that time, Lucius felt betrayed by Cassius. Afterward, Lucius sought out Zero for information about his biological father and formed a special relationship with the guild's master, a man named Samuel. This fact alone gave her immense confidence in Zero, but there was a simpler reason she wanted to hire them. This secret guild didn't deal in goods, but in something far sharper, the weapon of information. And with the information she possessed, she could have Samuel in the palm of her hand. The only man present in the guild brought Ibelia a glass of water. "I've contacted the guild master. Please wait a moment. In the meantime, have some water." Ibelia thanked him, silently scrutinizing the man before her. After all, the scent emanating from this man was far too unique for her to miss. It was a perfume she couldn't yet afford, Lysala herbs, known for soothing the skin. With that thought, she abruptly grabbed the man's arm, startling him. "Is something the matter?" Ibelia smiled sweetly. "Why should I sit here and wait? Isn't that right, Guildmaster Samuel?" At her words, the man's expression turned glacial, his eyes fixing on her. "What makes you think that?" Ibelia continued to study him, then replied, "Samuel, you have a frail younger sister, so you constantly burn Lysala herbs in her room, as they're quite effective. That's why you smell of Lysala. Also, that seemingly ordinary gold ring with an emerald on your index finger. Wouldn't that be an artifact that can change one's appearance?" After her words, the man remained silent for a long moment, then suddenly burst into laughter, praising her. "Haha, interesting. You're worth talking to." As he spoke, he lightly twisted the ring on his finger. In an instant, a magical transformation occurred, and a handsome man with pale skin, golden eyes, and silver hair stood before her. "So, miss, what do you want from me?" "I am Samuel, the guild master of Zero." Ibelia smiled, placing a heavy pouch on the table. "Please exchange these jewels for cash, and also, I'd like you to find a female doctor for me. She has reddish-orange hair and green eyes, likely residing in the capital or nearby. Her name is Irene Lawner." Ibelia's reason for seeking this particular doctor was because she was the only one capable of creating medicine for Samuel's sister. Hearing her request, Samuel nodded. All right, what's the price? Ibelia gestured towards the bag of goods on the table. This should be enough to cover the cost of finding the doctor, but I believe we'll be dealing with zero frequently in the future. So the price I offer is a method to completely cure your sister. Samuel was stunned by the confident words of the girl before him. What did you just say? I've spent 7 years, ever since Arya was born, searching for a cure, but to no avail. How can you? This novel's title, Arya's Light, referred to Samuel's sister, Arya, who was the female protagonist. Despite her frail body, she possessed an incredibly warm heart. So warm and kind that even Lucius, who grew up feeling betrayed by Ibelia and Cassius, opened his heart to Arya's warmth. The holy power consuming her body was the only light capable of breaking Lucius' curse. Recalling the original plot, Ibelia suggested to Samuel, try feeding your sister peach blossoms. They're cultivated in the Sizen Empire and can help strengthen her constitution. Samuel was skeptical of this information, responding, Miss, why should I trust your words? Ibelia shrugged, unfazed. Whether the information is reliable or not is for you and your team to verify. If you find that female doctor to create medicine for Arya, then our transaction will proceed even more smoothly. After a moment of silence, Samuel asked, All right, is there anything else? Yes, one more thing. After a busy day, Ibelia returned safely to the Count's mansion that evening. Stepping inside, she breathed a sigh of relief, grateful she hadn't been caught. Just then, a servant's voice called out, Miss, it's time for dinner. Ibelia replied gently, I'll be right there. After changing her clothes, she arrived at the dining room, where everyone in the Count's family was already seated. Looking at his daughter, the Count asked coldly, You're quite late. Seeing her father's expression, Ibelia thought to herself as she sat down, He looks more serious than I expected. As his daughter stared at him without speaking, the Count questioned, What are you looking at? Ibelia awkwardly lowered her eyes to the delicious food on the table, replying, Nothing, father. I was just thinking about something else. With nothing more to say, she silently ate the food in front of her. The Count seemed to have finished his meal, and as he wiped his mouth, he called her name. Ibelia immediately responded to her father's call, noticing his face had become icy cold. I heard you went to the Adra mansion yesterday. Why didn't you tell me? What was the reason for your visit? Hearing this, Ibelia placed her knife on the table, sighing with half-closed eyes. Lying seemed like the best option in this situation, but Ibelia didn't want to do that. Then, she revealed shocking news to everyone at the table. I went to request Duke Cassius to break off our engagement. A deathly silence fell over the dining room until the Count, showing no emotion, broke the stillness. What did you just say? Ibelia continued, a faint smile playing on her lips. I asked Duke Cassius to annul the engagement. I wanted to discuss this matter with you, father. But before she could finish, her eyes widened, catching sight of a figure approaching. The enraged Count had already strode forward, striking her hard across the face. His eyes, blazing with fury, glared at her as if she were something repulsive. His threatening words echoed in the room. Ibelia, don't test my patience. I will speak with Duke Cassius again, for this marriage will absolutely not be canceled. With that, the Count turned and left. You need to understand that. After the Count had fully disappeared, Derek looked at his despised sister with contempt. Are you truly insane, Ibelia? Her cheek burned from the slap, but she turned to him, her expression unchanged. Is that all you have to say to me? Her attitude left Derek both bewildered and irritated. What else do you want me to say? Be specific, Ibelia replied coldly. I'd like to hear an apology, or at the very least, are you all right? At her words, Derek laughed, then spoke through gritted teeth. You've been spouting nonsense ever since last time. Stop causing trouble for this family. Live as if you're already dead. Ibelia stepped closer to him, asking as she moved, So you're not going to apologize to me? Derek roared in fury. I will never apologize to you, not in this lifetime. At his outburst, Ibelia subtly produced a small vial filled with a mysterious shimmering light, letting a drop fall to the floor as she looked at the despicable boy before her. Inwardly, Ibelia sighed. Derek, I gave you a chance to apologize, so don't blame me. Under Ibelia's control, the shimmering light, or liquid, stealthily seeped into Derek's leg. She recalled her conversation with Samuel at the Zero Guild's shop that afternoon. She had mentioned someone pushing her down the stairs, and while she only suffered minor injuries, she still wanted revenge. Samuel had nodded. Compared to what others request, this is a simple request. Here, seeing his demeanor, she couldn't help but think he really gets excited when it comes to harming others, but I'm a bit hesitant about this. Samuel quickly produced a small glass vial, handing it to her with a cheerful air. Here you are, miss. This will surely satisfy you. Having used the liquid, Ibelia sighed once more. She turned and silently left the dining room, thinking that she truly wanted to leave this manor as soon as possible. Soon, a quiet night passed, and warm sunlight bathed the glittering manor. In Duke Cassius's mansion, a servant stood before him, reporting the findings of his investigation. On the surface, Count Vane pretends to care for his daughter, but within the manor, he completely neglects her. Furthermore, it seems the Countess has been mistreating her. Sometimes, the Countess would starve her or lock her in the study. Cassius listened to the report, interrupting, "What about physical abuse?" The servant shook his head. "None, sir. How is that possible?" Cassius asked, perplexed. "If there's no physical abuse, then what about the wound on her arm?" Unable to find an answer, a restless Cassius abruptly stood up and gave an order. "I'm going to the Vane Manor." Cassius's declaration left his servant bewildered. "Sir, why are you suddenly going there?" "Because I need to confirm some things." Soon, Duke Cassius's carriage was on its way to the Count's manor. Sitting in the carriage, his mind was still filled with confusion. He planned to specifically ask the young lady about the mark, but if she truly was being abused, what should he do? Looking at his impassive reflection in the window, Cassius frowned in frustration. He knew he didn't have the answers yet, but he was acting impulsively. "I don't even understand myself anymore." Not long after, the Count's butler rushed frantically to the main gate, shouting, "Wait, your grace. The young Miss Ibelia is unwell at the moment. Perhaps your grace could come another day." Seeing the butler's clumsy and pale excuse, Cassius grew even more suspicious. Unwell after just one night? She seemed perfectly fine yesterday when she met with Rose. Cassius shook his head in refusal, startling the butler. "No, I must see her today. I repeat, I must see Miss Ibelia now." Meanwhile, in her room, Ibelia examined the bruise blooming on her cheek where her father had struck her. He hadn't held back, and the mark was prominent on her once flawless face, swollen and angry red. "This really isn't good, is it?" she murmured to herself. Despite the throbbing pain, Ibelia remained calm. She had mentally prepared herself for such occurrences. A short while later, a maid entered, whispering, "Miss, Master Derek has fallen down the stairs." Ibelia immediately feigned shock. "What? Is he injured?" Seeing her concern, the maid quickly explained, "It seems he's broken a leg. First your injury, and now the young master. Why do these things keep happening?" Ibelia smiled faintly to herself. "Yes, it seems misfortune has befallen us recently," she replied softly. She settled back comfortably into the plush bed, relieved that she wouldn't have to see Derek for a while. Not having to look at his unpleasant, sneering face improved her mood considerably, so she decided to use the excuse of illness to rest for the day. But just as she had settled down, a knock echoed on the door. "I just want a moment's peace," and now another interruption. How irritating. Ibelia took a deep breath, sighed, and then called out, "All right, come in." And the maid rushed in, her face pale with alarm. "Miss, there's a visitor." Confused by the maid's panic, Ibelia tilted her head curiously. "Why such a fuss over a visitor? It's hardly a matter of life and death." "No, miss, it's not just any visitor. It's Duke Cassius." Ibelia's eyes widened at the news. "He's here to see me without prior notice? But we just met yesterday. What more could he possibly have to discuss? Is he here to respond to my request to break off the engagement?" But with the bruise on her face, Ibelia was in no state to receive anyone. "How can I show myself like this?" She looked up and instructed the maid. "Go and tell the Duke that I'm unwell today and ask if he could come another time." The maid hurried off, but quickly returned, looking dejected. "Miss, it's no good. The Duke says he must see you today. He's waiting in the drawing room." Both maid and mistress sighed in unison. "There's no helping it now," Ibelia thought. "All right, Anne, help me prepare to see him." With Anne's assistance, Ibelia carefully arranged her hair and applied light makeup around her eyes, enhancing her natural beauty. "Miss, you're ready," the maid said, but her voice held a note of worry. "And what are we going to do? The bruise is too noticeable. We can't hide it." Indeed, no matter how much cosmetic they applied, the angry red swelling on her cheek remained stubbornly visible. The maid grew increasingly anxious on the verge of tears. If the Duke sees this bruise, oh no. After a moment of thought, Ibelia gave the maid another instruction. Bring me the widest of all my hats. Donning a wide-brimmed hat to partially obscure her face, Ibelia left her room and headed towards where the Duke awaited. However, as she neared the drawing room, the butler intercepted her. "Miss, it would be best if you returned to your room and rested today," he said politely, though his tone lacked any real respect. Ibelia responded coldly. "Duke Cassius is looking for me. Haven't you noticed?" The butler shook his head. "There's no need for you to come out, Mississippi. The Countess is already speaking with the Duke." Hearing the Countess mentioned, Ibelia immediately pictured the cruel woman's dreadful face. She's meddling again, so she's up to her schemes again, Ibelia thought, a sudden smile playing on her lips. If that's the case, I must go. She lifted her gaze, fixing the butler with a stare that made him flinch. "I have no intention of turning back. Step aside. We can't keep the Duke waiting." As Ibelia approached the drawing room, the Countess's voice drifted out, barely audible. "Your Grace, Ibelia truly isn't feeling well. Perhaps you could return another day." Hearing this, Ibelia thought, of course, she's trying to protect the family's image and her own. But what if Ibelia's defiance ruins her generous wife facade? Meanwhile, inside the room, as the Countess attempted to persuade the Duke, the sound of approaching footsteps reached her. "I said no one is allowed to enter," she snapped. She didn't finish her sentence. Ibelia walked in, startling the Countess, whose face paled instantly. With a sharp click, her fan snapped shut. Seeing Ibelia, the Duke asked, "Why are you only just arriving?" Ibelia thought, "And why did you arrive unannounced?" But outwardly, she replied politely, "I apologize for the surprise, Your Grace. It took me some time to prepare." At her voice, the Duke turned his gaze, his eyes scrutinizing the woman before him. Seeing her wearing a hat indoors, he couldn't help but ask, "Why are you wearing a hat?" Before Ibelia could answer, the Duke stepped forward and removed it. The hat fell to the floor beside her. Seeing the bruise on her face, the Duke suppressed a flicker of discomfort. "Was this injury also from your fall?" he asked. The Countess nervously interjected. She was careless, and so... But Duke Cassius immediately cut her off. Let the young lady speak for herself. Was this from fall or... Sensing a shift in the Duke's demeanor, Ibelia thought, what does he try to do? Is he truly this angry? She could clearly see the fury burning in his normally impassive face as he asked, "Did you fall, or were you struck?" The Duke gently lifted her chin, his gaze intent. "This looks like you were hit. Who dared to strike my fiancée?" A wave of intense anger and an overwhelming presence radiated from the Duke as he turned his gaze to the Countess behind him. Intimidated by his aura, the Countess hastily denied. "Your Grace, I swear I did not strike her." Ibelia calmly assured the Duke. "Your Grace, this wasn't from being struck." Cassius remained silent for a moment after hearing the excuse, then, in a surge of anger, grasped her hand and turned to face the Countess standing behind them. "I cannot leave my fiancée in such a squalid place. I will be taking Miss Vane to my estate in Audle." Ibelia's eyes widened in surprise at his words. No matter how she struggled, his grip on her hand remained firm, pulling her along. Stunned, Ibelia could only follow, a whirlwind of questions swirling in her mind. What had come over him? Why was the situation unfolding in a direction Ibelia hadn't foreseen? The carriage that had just arrived was now departing the Console Manor once more. Only once they were in the carriage, seated opposite the man, did Ibelia regain her composure. "What are you doing, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. Seeing her apparent anger, the Duke countered, "What are you doing, Miss Vane? How can you behave this way with your own family? Why demand to break off the engagement instead of seeking my help?" Ibelia shook her head wearily. "Regardless of how my family treats me, it is not something Your Grace should concern yourself with." Silence fell over the carriage once more. "So this is why you wish to break off the engagement?" Ibelia nodded. "That is essentially the reason." Cassius looked at her, then down at his own hands. His voice took on a formal tone. "Then allow me to make things clear today. Since we are engaged, you are mine. Therefore, we cannot break off the engagement. As for your personal affairs, I believe I have the right to intervene." His words sparked anger in Ibelia, sharpening her tone. "Why?" The Duke stared at her calmly. "Because, as I have made clear, we are engaged. Therefore, you are mine. That is not something that can be changed." but you don't even want to marry me. It was Ibelia's assumption, and it seemed true, but in that moment, hearing those words, the Duke didn't know how to respond. He turned his gaze towards the carriage window. I don't intend to force you, but I would like you to stay at my Audle estate for a while. The more he spoke, the more suspicious Ibelia became. Why is the Duke so concerned about me? It's simple. Anyone who sees how the Countess treats you would act as I do. Furthermore, as a Duke, I cannot allow my fiancée to reside elsewhere. I will take you to the Audle estate. You can rest assured. The carriage soon stopped in front of the Duke's residence. Afaro, the butler of the Audle estate, greeted them politely with a warm smile. I am Afaro, the butler of the Audle estate. Please come in, Miss Vane. The Duke reminded the butler. This young lady will be staying here for a while. Please ensure she is well taken care of. Hearing this, the butler and the surrounding servants bowed in response. Understood, Your Grace. I will now escort Miss Vane to her room. Ibelia was then led by the butler to a luxurious room adorned with numerous flowers. Miss, you may use this room. This is Dr. Adelhart. He will examine your injuries and ensure they don't worsen, the butler said, introducing a man with delicate features and long hair. Ibelia hesitated, intending to refuse. There's no need, really. Dr. Hart stepped forward with a reassuring smile. Please allow me to examine you, Mississippi. It is the Duke's order. At the mention of the Duke, Ibelia had to agree. She didn't want to refuse now, knowing that if the Duke found out, he might become angry again. Left with no choice, Ibelia wearily nodded. All right, doctor, have a look. Please tend to my injury. After a while, her wound was carefully bandaged and ointment applied. Once finished, the doctor expressed his sympathy. It must have been painful, Mississippi. Aside from this, are you feeling any other discomfort? Sensing the doctor's genuine concern, Ibelia shook her head with a small smile. No, I'm fine now. Dr. Hart returned the smile. That's good. If you feel any discomfort, don't hesitate to call me. When everyone had left the room, Ibelia sat on the bed and asked herself, what should I do now? She didn't fully understand this world, as she hadn't finished reading the entire book, but she knew that leaving now would be dangerous for a vulnerable woman like herself. After meeting Samuel and saving enough money, Ibelia had planned to leave the Vane Manor. But honestly, after all that had happened, she wasn't confident. Even though she came from a modern world, she couldn't guarantee her survival in this terrifying place. Furthermore, if she left now, would Ruth have a better mother? And heavens, there was also the matter of the heir. It was a truly headache-inducing mess. Moreover, Ibelia had already mentioned Ruth's biological father to the Duke, so now she felt obligated to see if Ruth's curse could be safely lifted. But was that a sufficient reason for an unmarried woman to stay at the estate of a man who already had a child? Was it truly appropriate? Ibelia remained lost in thought for a long time, until a knock on the door startled her. Turning to face the door, she said, "Come in." The door opened, and the person who appeared was none other than the adorable little boy, Ruth. He looked at his aunt with worried eyes, calling her name. "Aunt Ibelia, how was the injury on your cheek?" Seeing the boy's concern, Ibelia approached him and offered comfort. "Oh, it's all right now, young master. I'm fine. Is there something you need?" Hearing this, the boy hesitated shyly, finally speaking up. "Well, I was about to go for a walk in the garden, but I was wondering if you could come with me." Another invitation from the boy before her. This was the third time Ibelia had received such an invitation from him. "So, Aunt Ibelia, would you like to take a walk with me?" Now that she had moved into this household, seeing the boy's shy yet hopeful expression, Ibelia couldn't bring herself to refuse. She nodded with a smile. "All right, young master, let's go." And so, the two of them walked together under the warm sunlight, in a lush garden filled with meticulously cared-for plants and a myriad of beautiful flowers. Suddenly, she noticed some familiar weeds at her feet and chuckled. "Oh look, there's some clover." The unfamiliar word piqued Ruth's curiosity. "Aunt Ibelia, do you mean rabbit grass?" "Yes, young master. Rabbit grass is also called clover. Sometimes it even grows 4 leaves, and people call that a 4-leaf clover. There's a rumor that if someone finds a 4-leaf clover, their wish will come true." Ruth's eyes widened as he looked at her curiously. "So, Aunt Ibelia, have you ever found a 4-leaf clover?" Ibelia shook her head. "No, I've tried a few times, but I've never found one." The boy continued to inquire, "Aunt Ibelia, what wish would you make?" Hearing this, Ibelia pondered for a moment, her gaze softening as she looked at the boy. What wish would I make? Before she could answer, a servant approached and announced, "Young master, miss. It's time for dinner." Ibelia was a little surprised. "Is it evening already?" "Young master, let's go inside." Ruth nodded and followed her, but then paused, turning back to look at the clover at his feet, a thoughtful expression on his face. A short while later, at the dinner table, a dazzling array of delicacies, meticulously prepared by the estate's chef, lay before them. Despite the countless delicious dishes, a heavy atmosphere stifled Ibelia. Seeing that she was just sitting there, not touching her food, the Duke inquired, "Is the meal not to your liking?" Ibelia explained awkwardly, "No, it's delicious. I'm just not in the mood to eat right now." A voice spoke up. Ruth, who had been eating quietly, asked, "Father, will she be staying at the estate from now on?" The Duke considered this, nodding, then shaking his head. "It hasn't been fully decided yet, but for now, yes." Hearing his father's response, Ruth turned to Ibelia excitedly. "And if I find the four-leaf clover you mentioned before, my wish will come true, right?" Seeing that the boy was still talking about the four-leaf clover, Ibelia sighed inwardly, thinking she shouldn't have mentioned it. She smiled at the boy and explained, "Young master, that's just a rumor people spread. A four-leaf clover can't actually grant wishes, so don't waste your time looking for one." Ruth simply lowered his head at these words, offering no reply. That night, heavy rain poured down. Ibelia stood by the window looking out. Even through the glass, she could feel the chill brought by the downpour. With such heavy rain, it shouldn't be the gardener. Ibelia saw a figure in the garden, standing in the rain. But as she focused and recognized who it was, Ibelia's eyes widened, her face paling. She quickly rushed out of the mansion and towards the garden. She ran to the boy, Ruth, who was lying unconscious on the ground, and called his name in the darkness. "Ruth, wake up. What are you doing here?" Ibelia was surprised to find something clutched in the boy's hand. The sight of it nearly broke Ibelia's composure. "I told you it's hard to find, so don't look for it. I told you it can't grant wishes." Ibelia cried out, heartbroken. The sobbing seemed to rouse the boy. Feeling the warmth of the woman before him, Ruth weakly said, "But Aunt Ibelia." His hand scratched from digging in the dirt. He held up a four-leaf clover. "I found it, Aunt," he said with a tired but joyful smile. Soon after, the boy was brought back to his room and fell asleep before his fever could spike. The doctor examined him and declared that if he could sleep soundly until morning, he would recover. Seeing that Ibelia was still standing there worriedly, the Duke, who was standing nearby, suggested, "Miss, it's late. You should go and rest." But Ibelia didn't take her eyes off the boy in bed, shaking her head. "I'll stay here with him for a while. Could you all leave me alone with Ruth?" Duke Cassius considered this for a moment, then nodded, signaling for everyone in the room to leave. Finally, only Ibelia remained, sitting by the bedside, watching over the boy. After a while, Ruth, in his light sleep, stirred awake and glimpsed the figure by his bed. At first, he thought it was his nanny, but when he realized it was Aunt Ibelia, he tried to sit up. Ibelia gently urged him, "It's me, young master. Please continue resting. Don't sit up." Ruth obediently lay back down on his pillow. As if searching for something, Ibelia produced the four-leaf clover. "Young master, were you looking for this?" Seeing the clover, a spark of excitement flickered in the boy's eyes, followed by a relieved smile. "That's great, I didn't lose it." Unable to face his innocent smile, she lowered her head and whispered, "I told you not to look for it. It's just an ordinary plant. It can't grant wishes." Ruth wasn't disappointed, replying with a smile, "I know it can't grant wishes, but Aunt Ibelia, didn't you say you wanted to find one?" Ibelia looked up at the boy in surprise. "So you went looking for it for me?" Ruth nodded with a smile. "Yes, that's right. So make a wish." Faced with the boy's sincere gesture, Ibelia could only lower her head and ask herself, "Do I really deserve this? Why would he do this for someone like me? I don't deserve such kindness." The more she thought, the more tears welled up in her beautiful eyes. Her voice choked as she looked at the precious four-leaf clover in her hand. "Why did you give this to me, young master?" Ruth, lying in bed, calmly replied, "Because I want your wish to come true more than my own." "My wish?" Ibelia couldn't help but search her heart. Her wish was for her family to come back to her. But that was an impossible dream, as all those yearnings and hopes had long been shattered. Was that truly what she still wished for now? A family with a father and mother? Was her wish truly about family, or simply a yearning for love? Glancing at the sleeping boy in bed, Ibelia gently stroked his soft hair. In the end, the only way to make both her and Ruth's wishes come true. Ibelia sighed, realizing she had to make a final decision. A short while later, in the Duke's study. He saw Ibelia approaching and asked, "What is it, Miss Vane? Please sit." A cup of hot coffee was brought in by a servant and placed on the table. Cassius looked at the beautiful woman before him and repeated, "So, what brings you here? It's quite late. You should rest early." Ibelia looked up at the Duke and calmly stated her purpose. "Your Grace, regarding the marriage you proposed, let us proceed with it. As for the agreement concerning Ruth's parentage, please conduct it with me, not my father." The Duke was surprised by her sudden decision and asked curiously, "Why the sudden change of heart?" Ibelia lowered her gaze to her coffee cup and replied softly, "It's because of Ruth." The Duke pressed further, "What did Ruth do?" A gentle smile touched Ibelia's lips. "Yes, but that's a secret between myself and the young master. I'm afraid I cannot tell you. And once your Grace verifies the truth about Ruth's parentage, I want a divorce. As you know, I have no intention of marrying you. I agreed to this marriage because of Ruth and the conditions you offered. In fact, if Cassius wants to break Ruth's curse, Ibelia must bring Arya to treat Ruth. All of this will take at least 3 years. After 3 years, when the curse is broken, she will be able to live independently." Of course, the Duke was unaware of her inner calculations, so he coldly asked, "Do you truly dislike me that much?" The question startled Ibelia, and she looked up at him in surprise. "I'm asking, do you truly dislike me that much?" Ibelia shook her head awkwardly. "I don't dislike you, Your Grace. I simply wish to marry someone I love." "Then where do you plan to go after the divorce?" Ibelia shook her head. "I haven't thought that far ahead yet. Regarding the divorce, what is your decision?" Ibelia sincerely hoped the Duke would confirm the matter today. The Duke remained silent for a long moment, clearly in thought. "Very well, I will consider it. I agree to negotiate with you instead of Count Vane." Hearing this, Ibelia proposed, "If that's the case, I would like us to put everything in writing and sign it together." The Duke, sitting opposite her, nodded. "I will have the scribe draw up the contract. As for the divorce, we can discuss the details later." Each side having conceded a point, Ibelia agreed. "I concur. Oh, and one more thing. During our marriage, I hope your Grace will show more concern for Ruth." Cassius nodded, puzzled, but countered, "I am already taking care of Ruth." Of course, Ibelia knew the Duke cared deeply for the boy, but she pressed, "Does Ruth think so? If you care for him, why were you looking at documents when Ruth was ill?" The Duke looked down at the floor, closing his eyes as he replied, "The doctor said he would recover with rest, so my staying by his side wouldn't make him recover any faster." At the Duke's slow response, Ibelia frowned, replying in frustration, "But what if Ruth thinks you don't care because you weren't there? That's not true, is it? You care for him so much that you couldn't even focus on your paperwork." At this, the Duke fell silent. "So, what is your answer? It's not a bad suggestion for you, is it, Your Grace?" Cassius sighed, perplexed. "Care for him? I'm not sure what you mean specifically." Ibelia smiled knowingly, having anticipated this. "Then allow me to demonstrate. First, put your documents aside and go see Ruth." To her surprise, the Duke did as she said. He placed the documents in his hand on the table, leaned back, and took a deep breath to relax. From the very beginning, Ibelia had noticed that the man in front of her wasn't as cold as he appeared. He cared deeply for Ruth, but perhaps due to a lack of affection in his own childhood, he didn't know how to express love to a child. As Ibelia left the room, the Duke rubbed his hair in confusion, recalling how impulsive he had been when he saw her injured. It truly did seem like time to call off the engagement. She said she hadn't decided where to live yet, so where would she go after the divorce? What if, exhausted, she returned to the Vane Manor? He couldn't understand why he was so worried, why he cared so much about that woman. Later, in Ruth's room, the nurse was slightly surprised to see the Duke arrive. Seeing that she was about to speak, the Duke raised a finger to his lips, signaling her not to wake the boy. The nurse smiled and gestured for the Duke to sit. "Please have a seat. I believe the young master is waiting for you." "Then I shall excuse myself. Please stay as long as you like, Your Grace." Cassius, wanting to be alone with his nephew, nodded. "You've done well. Go and rest." The nurse quietly left the room, a knowing smile on her face at seeing the Duke taking the initiative to visit the young master. Silence returned to the room. Under the faint moonlight, the Duke quietly watched his nephew. His gaze fell on the boy's small, frail hand, and he gently took it in his own. The voice of his sister echoed in his mind. "Cassius, hold my hand." His sister had reached out to him like that many times. That was the last time he held her hand, wasn't it? Although Julia was no longer in this world, her bloodline still lived on. Cassius had taken in this lovely nephew when Ruth was still a small baby, and he had promised himself to protect the boy always. But clearly, the boy had been unhappy. Had he failed in his promise? The child was so afraid of him, even though their relationship was like that of father and son. So why did that woman speak as if he was doing something wrong? The Duke couldn't see anything wrong with the way he expressed his love. While he was still pondering this, Ruth stirred awake in his bed. The boy seemed surprised to see someone sitting by his bedside. Cassius reassured him, "Don't sit up, rest." Ruth, still a little hazy, cautiously asked, "Father, did you come to see me?" Cassius nodded in confirmation. "Yes, I came to see you." Seeing his father nod, the boy lying in bed couldn't help but smile happily. He really? The Duke asked, puzzled. "Why are you laughing?" "Because I'm happy you're here, father." Seeing the child's genuine smile, the Duke was momentarily stunned. Was this child truly that happy? How could he be worthy of being called father by this boy? The Duke nodded, reminding him, "It's late. Go back to sleep." Ruth happily agreed and closed his eyes again. Seeing the boy's smile, Cassius felt a strange tightness in his throat, as if something was caught there. Why did he feel this way? The next morning, in the Duke's study, Ibelia quietly read the contract in her hands. The contract included clauses related to Count Van Eyne, but something seemed amiss. Ibelia looked up, a puzzled frown creasing her brow. "Why isn't there a clause about the divorce in this contract?" she asked. "You said we'd discuss it later, but isn't it strange not to mention it at all?" Cassius replied calmly, "There's no need for it now, so I didn't include it." Ibelia firmly disagreed. "That's not right. You have to include it, with a note that we'll discuss the details later. It needs to be clear." Caught between their opposing views, the scribe asked nervously, "What should I do then?" Seeing Cassius's silence, Ibelia spoke up. "Please add a clause stating that the divorce terms will be discussed later." The scribe looked helplessly towards Cassius, as Ibelia also turned her gaze to him. Cassius sat in silence, considering their expectant gazes. Finally, he conceded, "Fine, add it for her." Hearing this, Ibelia smiled brightly. Then, remembering something, she asked, "I have a personal maid named Annie at the Van Eyne estate. Could you please have her brought to me?" The scribe, with a reassuring smile, patted his chest. "I'll contact Count Van Eyne and have the maid brought to you, madam. The wedding preparations will take at least 3 months, so you'll have plenty of time to settle in before then. Is there anything else you require, madam?" At his words, Ibelia inquired, "Is it possible to scale down the wedding?" The scribe shook his head apologetically. "That might be a little difficult. After all, we must uphold the Otto family's honor, mustn't we?" "I understand. I won't interfere. You can handle it." The scribe nodded happily. "Thank you for your understanding, madam. I'll take my leave now." When only the two of them remained in the room, Ibelia looked up at Cassius. "Can we talk now?" Cassius nodded, confirming he had cast a silencing spell to ensure their privacy. Satisfied, Ibelia said, "In that case, let's get straight to the point. The information you wanted regarding Ruth's real father. It's Prince Leon Cesare of the Magic Kingdom." At the mention of the name, Cassius's expression darkened instantly. "Leon Cesare?" he asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "Are you certain?" His eyes widened, burning with an angry fire. In the original novel, Leon was depicted as a playboy, so Cassius's furious reaction was understandable. Coincidentally, Leon was also King Caesare's illegitimate son. Perhaps due to an inferiority complex, Leon caused numerous incidents throughout his life, tarnishing his reputation. Naturally, King Cesare was displeased, leading to Leon being sent to the Magic Academy to study. There, Prince Leon met a beautiful girl. That girl was Julia, Cassius's sister. Leon was exceptionally kind to Julia, but being the king's illegitimate son, he worried that strangers would pursue Julia and put her in danger. Therefore, their relationship was kept secret. Ironically, the only person who knew of these secrets was the villainous Count Van Eyne. The bigger problem was the red mark that appeared on Ruth's chest. The Cesare family's royal curse had been passed down to Leon, and naturally, this curse was also inherited by his son, Ruth. The most suspicious part of the novel was that Leon knew Julia was carrying his child. He returned to the Cesare kingdom and asked the king for permission to marry the woman he loved. After that, there was no news of him. He never returned to Julia. This was strange, because after meeting Julia, Leon had found the love of his life. So why didn't he return, even if he truly loved her? Ibelia suspected there was more to the story. If she had read the entire novel, she wouldn't be as confused as she was now. Upon receiving this information, Cassius stood up coldly. "I'll be going. I need to investigate this further. Ibelia, feeling a wave of relief wash over her, stretched languidly. Then I'll go see Ruth now. Now she could finally create the happiness she and Ruth had always longed for. As she walked within, Ibelia saw a maid approaching her with a tray laden with food. Ibelia asked kindly, "Is that Ruth's meal?" The maid replied, "Yes, it is." Since she was already on her way to see Ruth, Ibelia offered, "Let me take it." The maid hesitated. "Oh no, madam. How could I let you do such a thing?" "It's all right. I really want to," Ibelia said cheerfully, taking the food tray without hesitation. Entering the room that had just been prepared for Ruth, she asked, "Young master, are you feeling any better?" Seeing her, Ruth greeted her happily. "And Ibelia?" Ibelia smiled gently. "You must be hungry. I brought you some food." Ruth, ever thoughtful, asked, "What about you, Aunt?" She replied, "I'll eat later." Ruth then suggested, "Then let's eat together." Ibelia still refused with a smile. "No, I can't do that. The chef worked hard to prepare this meal just for you, so you need to eat it all so you can get better and grow strong." Ruth asked innocently, "If I eat it all, will I grow as tall as father?" Ibelia chuckled at his innocent question, thinking, "This child likes Cassius more than I thought." Aloud, she said, "Of course, if you eat it all, one day you'll even be taller than the Duke." Encouraged by these words, Ruth began to eat quickly. Seeing him eat so fast, Ibelia became a little flustered. "Eat slowly, young master." After finishing his meal, Ruth took something out and said, "Aunt Ibelia, I have something I want to give you." Ibelia looked surprised. "For me?" Ruth opened his book, took out a beautiful four-leaf clover, and said, blushing, "Surely, I found this and wanted to give it to you, Aunt Ibelia." Ibelia was a little surprised by the unexpected gift, but then she smiled softly. "No need. My wish has already come true. So, young master, why don't you make a wish?" Ruth asked, puzzled. "Make a wish? What should I wish for?" Holding the four-leaf clover in his hand, Ruth began to reveal his true feelings. "My wish is, I wish Aunt Ibelia would become my mother. But if you don't like it..." Ibelia immediately interrupted him. "Of course I'd like it." Her answer left Ruth bewildered. Ibelia smiled radiantly. "I will become your mother." Ruth froze, unsure how to react, asking mechanically, "Really?" Then the boy suddenly burst into tears. "Aunt Ibelia, I'm so happy. I'll be a good boy. I won't be picky with my food, and I'll learn to behave." Ruth promised through his tears. Ibelia gently held out her hands. "No, Ruth. A lovely child like you deserves all the love in the world just by being yourself." She embraced him. "Just stay the way you are. Do what you want. As long as you're happy, that's enough." Ruth then asked, "What about you, Aunt Ibelia? Will you be happy to be my mother?" Ibelia hugged Ruth tighter, smiling brightly. "Of course, I'm very happy." Ruth's thoughtfulness made Ibelia want to protect him even more. In stark contrast to the heartwarming scene in Ruth's room, Cassius sat alone, murmuring the name Leon. His hands clenched, slamming heavily on the table, his whole body radiating intense anger. He recalled his conversations with his sister, who always tried to defend the man. Who is he, Julia? Who is this man who hasn't even shown his face? Back then, Julia stubbornly refused to reveal his name, only telling Cassius. He said he would return once he received permission to marry, but because of family opposition, the marriage approval has been delayed. Cassius was furious, thinking, that must be a lie. Who would refuse to marry Miss Altara? Did that bastard know you were pregnant? Even then, Julia still defended Leon, saying, "Don't call him a bastard." Of course, he knew. So when he heard the news, he hurried back to his homeland. "If it's a girl, we'll name her Lucia, and if it's a boy, we'll name him Lucius." Aren't those beautiful names? He chose them himself. So we must take good care of Ruth until he returns. Faced with his sister's determination, Cassius was completely helpless. How can you wait for someone who will never come, Julia? Why, that prince of the Cesare kingdom of all people. A prince known as a playboy. How dare that bastard? Cassius called for Logan and gave him an order. Logan, investigate the Cesare royal family and Leon Cesare. Also, find out what dealings Earl Vane had with the Cesare royal family. Logan bowed his head. "I will prepare a letter for Earl Vanian, as Madam requested." Cassius said, "Good," not intending to stop it. Then Cassius slowly walked out of his office. He strolled down the dark hallway, stopping at a bookshelf, reaching for something hidden behind an old book. He looked at it, thinking, it's been a while since we've seen each other, Julia. Finally, the object in his hand was revealed, a picture of Julia. He spoke to Julia's picture. Lately, I've met someone a lot like you. She always lives a life where she has to hide all her struggles. She told me a secret. It seems that I, who have always been good at hiding my own feelings, am now starting to crumble. It's just a wound, but why does it affect me so much? Is it because the wound has been stepped on by the snow? And that girl, no matter how she's treated, always smiles like that. What are you thinking, Miss Ibelia? The next day at Cassius's estate, Ruth entered a room, thinking this is the first time I've known this room existed. He stared straight ahead at something covered by a red cloth, curious about what it was. Without hesitation, he reached out to pull the cloth away. A portrait of a girl so beautiful it made him gasp appeared before him. Who is this angel? Just then, a voice echoed throughout the manor. Ruth, I'm coming for you now. It was Ibelia, looking for Ruth, likely playing hide-and-seek with him. Ibelia walked around, calling out, Ruth, are you here? Ruth hid and giggled, covering his mouth. You'll never find me. But in the end, Ruth was just a child, and Ibelia found him easily. She had already spotted his small bottom peeking out. However, Ibelia pretended not to know, suppressing her laughter as she continued to call out, Where is Ruth? Ibelia continued to walk around, pretending to search. She flipped through books, then lifted the rug, constantly asking aloud, Where could he be? Here or here? Gradually, Ibelia approached Ruth's hiding spot. Is it here? Ibelia smiled at the disgruntled-looking Ruth. I found you again. Ruth pouted, thinking, if I don't want her to find me, I need to choose a new spot. He walked along, thinking, where should I hide next time? Then he discovered a strange room. It was a place he had never seen before. Ruth was very curious about this room, and he walked in without a second thought. A red string was revealed, and he couldn't help but pull it. After finishing their game of hide-and-seek with Ibelia, everyone gathered for dinner. Ibelia said to Ruth, Ruth, shall we go for a walk after dinner? But Ruth refused. And Ibelia, I want to go somewhere else today. Ibelia teased him. Somewhere else? Do you have some hidden treasure? Ruth replied, not treasure, but a portrait. It's a portrait of an angel, he said, his eyes shining. Ibelia was puzzled. An angel? Ruth replied excitedly, yes, I want to go see it with you, and Ibelia. Then Ruth led Ibelia back to that room. Ruth approached the portrait and called out, Aunt Ibelia, this is the portrait of the angel. He then pulled the crimson curtain to the ground. Ibelia was shocked by the sight before her. This is Julia Ottle. Young master, we've seen the angel now, so let's go out, she said, thinking she had to leave quickly before Cassius saw this. Ruth was disappointed. Aunt Ibelia, he asked sadly, was my real mother beautiful like this? Ibelia thought, so Ruth still remembers his real mother. She asked Ruth, do you remember your mother? Ruth quickly denied it. No, it's not like that. Suddenly, Cassius appeared, his face filled with rage. What are you doing here? Ruth started to panic, crying out worriedly, Father! Cassius demanded sharply. Who found this place? Not wanting Cassius to be angry with Ibelia, Ruth quickly confessed, It was me. Cassius was still furious. You? Ruth continued, Yes, I invited Aunt Ibelia here, so please don't be angry with her, Father. Cassius roared, Never come to this place again. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ruth lowered his head. Yes, Father. That night, Ibelia slept with Ruth. Ibelia asked him, So, what shall we talk about today? Ruth, still worried about what had happened during the day, asked, Aunt Ibelia, do you think Father is really angry? Ibelia thought, this child really cares about Cassius. It's touching. She smiled softly and said, No, he's not angry. Ruth still felt uneasy, half hidden under the covers. But Father's voice was really scary. Ibelia had to admit, Indeed, I thought it was quite frightening too. But it seems Cassius's anger is directed at himself, because he couldn't protect Julia. He might have been feeling guilty towards Ruth all this time. Despite thinking this, Ibelia comforted Ruth. It's not like that. The Duke is just very busy lately. Ruth asked innocently, Really? Of course. Now, let me tell you a nice story. Ruth replied happily, Okay, please do. He then added excitedly, Nanny said my father could defeat a dragon. Ibelia responded, Of course he can. Do you want to be like the Duke? Ruth replied eagerly, Yes, I do. Ibelia asked, So, when you grow up, are you going to defeat a dragon too? Ruth began to think, and then Ibelia suddenly laughed. Dragons are scary, aren't they? I didn't think you'd seriously consider it. But Ruth said seriously, No, if I become a great knight. I want to protect you. And Ibelia. Hearing this, Ibelia was taken aback. Ruth continued, I'll eat well and grow taller in the future. If I can grow as tall as Father, I will protect you, and Ibelia. I will protect you, and Ibelia. He lay next to Ibelia, smiling, clearly delighted. These words touched Ibelia deeply. Ruth was such a good child. He started to feel a little shy. Of course, if that scary dragon bullies you, I'll defeat it too. At this moment, Ibelia became so moved that tears welled up in her eyes, causing Ruth to stammer. Aunt Ibelia, are you crying? Did I do something wrong? Ibelia then realized she was crying. It turned out that what she had always needed was human warmth. A child's words could actually make a strong woman like her shed tears. She no longer hid her emotions, silently looking at Ruth with a gentle smile. No, it's because I'm so happy to hear you want to protect me. Ruth calmed down, feeling much better. Really? Then I'll grow up quickly and protect you like father. She continued to smile, letting the tears run down her pink cheeks. Thank you. The next morning, the sun had already risen high. Ruth sat at the dining table, looking dejected. It was just him and Ibelia. Cassius hadn't come. Ruth looked down at the floor, as if he was about to cry. Father must be angry with me. He didn't come. Ibelia quickly explained. If this continues, the distance between father and son will only grow wider. No, it's probably because he's busy with work. Don't worry. But she couldn't help but wonder, is he really avoiding Ruth on purpose? But why? I wish the original story had told me more about Cassius. I know so little about him now. In the original Arya of Light, the events take place after Ruth receives his title, by which time Cassius is already deceased. What readers know about Cassius is all from Ruth's descriptions, a stern father. If there's one more thing of note, it's that Cassius dislikes Ibelia. While I don't know why Cassius is avoiding Ruth for Ruth's happiness, I can't just stand by and do nothing. That night, Ibelia gathered her courage and went to Duke Otto's bedroom. She looked hesitant and bewildered. Finally, she decided to act. She slowly raised her hand and knocked softly on the door. He bade her enter, surprised to see Ibelia. He asked, "What is it?" "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday," Ibelia said. Cassius closed his eyes. "If it's about that, I won't discuss it." She still tried to explain, but Ruth is really worried. Cassius turned his face away. "It's none of your business." Words weren't enough, so Ibelia began to reason with him. "When we signed the contract, I asked you to care more about Ruth." Cassius denied it. "This is different." But was it really different? Looking into Ibelia's eyes, they widened, as if slightly embarrassed. His face flushed with awkwardness. He really did care about Ruth. He didn't want Ruth to know about his birth. Tears glimmered in his eyes. She felt his deep emotions too, standing quietly, looking at the sorrowful face before her. He was afraid that Ruth's family secret would be exposed, but he couldn't hide it forever. Ruth wanted to know more about his birth mother. It was something he would eventually find out. Ibelia no longer felt the need to press Cassius to reveal the truth. "What are you talking about?" he began, feeling uncomfortable. "You know very well what I'm talking about," she said. He clenched his fists, looking angry, but he shouldn't be blamed. "Why should Ruth know? He never needs to know, not in this lifetime," he said, slamming his hand on the table. Yet Ibelia responded fearlessly. "There's no secret in this world that can be kept forever. You know that." But inwardly, she thought, if Ruth never finds out about this in his lifetime, that would be for the best. Unfortunately, not long after Cassius's death, Ruth did discover the truth. When the father you believed in all your life, the one who held your hand and raised you, isn't actually your biological father, what happens then? Sadly, Ruth began to doubt Cassius's affection because he never revealed the truth. Feeling betrayed, he started to resent Cassius. But Cassius, the one who could tell Ruth the whole truth, was already gone. It was a truly tragic fate for this family. Ibelia said to the Duke, "Before Ruth learns the truth in a way you wouldn't want, you should tell him yourself." As soon as she finished speaking, a large hand suddenly reached out towards her face, leaving her too shocked to react. Cassius stood up, grabbing her arm. "No matter what anyone says, Ruth is my son." His gaze was heavy with burden. The man before her, who treated Ruth as his own, made her feel sympathy. He continued, "So I'll handle this myself. Aside from the promise I made to you," he began loosening his grip on her arm. "But if you keep this up, Lady Otto, you will forever only be that child's stepmother." These words struck Ibelia deeply. He had said he wanted to protect her. But why hide your sister, the child's aunt? Even to avoid suspicion, the young master should at least know he has an aunt, shouldn't he? "Why do you care so much about this?" he asked, ruffling his hair in confusion. She answered softly, "Because I know the pain of growing up without a mother and the pain of being an illegitimate child, like the young master." These words suddenly made Cassius realize something. "That's why, even if it's just a little, I want to sympathize with with Ruth for the child's happiness. At that moment, Cassius saw her smiling beautifully. Cassius understood. This person had no intention of separating him and his son. She truly wished for Ruth to know the truth, but feared Ruth would abandon him. He began to recall the day he first held him. My last name. The maid beside him didn't understand what he was saying. Cassius held a newborn baby in his arms. This child will take my last name. Call him Ruth. Nurse, isn't he lovely? He looked at the baby's innocent face, unable to hide his joy. Now he had to make a decision. That night, he entered Ruth's room alone. Ruth was sleeping soundly. Cassius noticed something by his bedside. It was a book about dragons. He watched Ruth sleeping peacefully beside that book. Cassius raised his hand as if to stroke his head, but pulled it back at the last moment. Was he being too cowardly? Cassius stood there quietly, looking at the sleeping Ruth. This child, he remembered the look on Ruth's face when he tried to grab his arm and ask about his aunt. Ruth had always longed for his love. But he kept thinking, have I ever responded to that expectation? If I've never responded, can I truly call him my son? He didn't even know of his mother's existence. Suddenly, Ibelia's voice echoed in his mind. Ibelia's face appeared vividly in his thoughts. There will come a day when Ruth will surely find out the truth. Those words were true. Eventually, the truth would come to light. He clenched his fists. But when the time comes to face the truth, will this child still smile at me? He then left Ruth's room, leaving the unanswered questions behind. He lay in his own bed, the moonlight creeping in through the window. The moonlight was so bright, Cassius turned his head, trying to close his eyes and rest. But memories of the past surfaced. His father sat in the very chair he now occupied. Why did you do that, father? His father yelled. Where are your manners? What kind of behavior is this? You don't even greet your father. I wanted to ask why you hurt Julia's arm. Fury burned in Cassius's eyes. His father, calmly seated in his chair, said, You and Julia are truly pathetic. I was merely disciplining her for her disgraceful behavior. Disciplining. Hearing those words, Cassius's blood boiled. His father watched silently, curious to see what his son would do. Cassius walked up to his father's desk, his gaze not one of respect, but of disdain. How dare you look at me with those eyes? His father sneered, but anger flickered in his eyes. Cassius remained calm, as if issuing a warning. He firmly stated, Father, if you ever dare to use violence again, I will never forgive you. He slammed his hand on the table. Using violence to discipline a child is the worst possible method. Cassius's furious expression made it clear he had no intention of showing his father any respect. One morning, Ruth's loud cries echoed throughout the manor. The nurse stood in the room with Julia's portrait, holding Ruth, looking quite flustered. Oh, my little master, what's wrong? Just then, Cassius happened to pass by and, seeing Ruth crying, stopped to ask, Nurse? She seemed worried about Ruth's condition. He's been crying for a while now, Your Grace. The little master just won't stop. Ruth cried louder and louder. Cassius watched him silently, saying nothing. Finally, an idea came to him. Let me hold him. He held out his arms, ready to take Ruth. The nurse hesitated. Your Grace, are you sure you can? It's all right. Then please support his head with one hand like this. Yes, just like that. He held Ruth in his arms, and within seconds, the child stopped crying, perhaps recognizing his face. My last name. At that moment, the nurse finally understood what he meant. The child's name. From now on, he will bear my last name. Call him Ruth. Nurse. He gazed at Ruth's small face, unable to take his eyes off him, smiling with joy. The nurse agreed that the name he chose was wonderful. This is the child Julia risked her life to bring into this world. Therefore, he should have all the rights as a member of the Otto family. Don't you think so, nurse? Yes, of course, Your Grace. I believe Madam would have wanted that as well, the nurse said with shared joy. But he cannot be publicly known as Julia's son. There's only one way. Ruth will become a member of the Otto family as my son. He told his father this decision, leaving him stunned. Ruth is Julia's son, he said furiously, the wrinkles on his face deepening. He couldn't control himself and swung at Cassius. How dare you? But Cassius easily caught his hand. I am no longer the child you can dictate everything to, father. Remember this. Ruth is my son, and this child will grow up as the rightful heir. Yes, everything he did was for Ruth. Yet, why did Ibelia always say he was wrong? Why did she always turn everything upside down? Why did she always wear that smile that made him want to protect her? Even that morning, he couldn't shake these thoughts. He came to Ibelia's room. She opened the door, seeing the Duke standing there, puzzled as to why he had come. Could you spare me a moment? His voice was raspy and cold. Ibelia noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Had he not slept? His eyes were red and lacked their usual vitality. She readily agreed. Yes, of course. This way, please. As he walked, he clutched a piece of cloth in his hand, his eyes downcast, seemingly lost in some melancholic memory. Finally, he stopped before a room. Julia's portrait hung on the wall. Ibelia had been watching his back, sensing the turmoil within him. He spoke. I still don't intend to tell Ruth about his real mother. If possible, I want him to remain unaware of it his entire life. He turned to Ibelia, his face emphasizing the weight of his next words. A flicker of anger crossed his eyes. But telling him that my sister is his aunt, that's fine. Ibelia noticed a hint of happiness glimmering within his gaze. So please tell Ruth he can look at this portrait anytime. The distance between father and son has always been so vast. Why doesn't the Duke tell him directly? Ruth has been waiting for the Duke to tell him personally. Ibelia smiled at him, seemingly offering encouragement. Cassius, hearing the suggestion from someone close to his son, took a moment to consider. I understand. Not long after, he somehow managed to do it. Ruth excitedly pulled Ibelia along, his voice bubbling with joy. And Ibelia, hurry this way. He was brimming with excitement. Slow down, young master, she said, quickening her pace to keep up. Look, Aunt Ibelia, over there. He pointed to the portrait on the wall. He began to explain, his voice filled with delight. That's Aunt Julia. She's father's sister, so she's my aunt. The nurse said she was like an angel. He looked so happy. She couldn't help but share in his joy. Just then, a maid entered. Miss, I'm sorry, but there's a visitor here to see you. A visitor? She was surprised anyone would seek her out, but upon hearing the name, her face immediately fell. Countess Van Eyne, she held no fondness for the woman. I won't see her. Send her back. From now on, if she comes, don't even bother reporting it to me. Just send her away. But the maid looked anxious. But miss, if you don't see her, she won't let your personal maid leave. Ibelia realized this was a tricky situation. She turned to Ruth. Young master, I'll go see the visitor and be right back, all right? I promise I'll return immediately. He grew distressed, clutching Ibelia's hand tightly, tears welling in his eyes. And Ibelia, can't you stay? I'll be right back, and then we can go for a walk in the garden and make clover bracelets, okay? Ruth could see the forced smile on her face. He was heartbroken, but couldn't say anything to keep her there. Okay, I'll wait for you. In the drawing room, Countess Van Eyne was still causing a commotion. I'm Ibelia's mother. How can you not let me see her? The butler said frantically, Madam, please calm down. A figure walked in. Whose mother do you think you are? Ibelia asked coldly. The woman bristled, her face thick with white powder, her lips painted a deep crimson, a picture of indignant and unsettling anger. Ibelia turned to the butler. There's no need for refreshments. You may leave. The butler nodded, saying, Understood. The countess raged. What kind of hospitality is this? But Ibelia remained composed. Uninvited guests are not guests. What did you say? The woman's fury intensified. So what are you doing here? The countess composed herself slightly. Aren't you going to invite your family to the wedding? Duke Otto said no dowry. Are you planning to sever ties with your family? The Van Eyne family? Indeed, Ibelia responded without hesitation. Don't forget this marriage came about because of the Earl. But I am the Duke's fiancée, she stated calmly. Truly, there was no reason for her to maintain ties with the Van Eyne family any longer. Once I'm married, I'll be a member of the Otto family. Why should I maintain ties with the Van Eyne family? You. The countess's rage deepened. The wrinkles on her face etched deeper with anger. But Ibelia didn't let her continue, cutting her off. You've always hated me bearing the Van Eyne name. There's nothing left to say, is there? Excuse me. The countess played her final card. She cried out, Your mother! The words froze Ibelia in her tracks. Your mother's life was saved by this family. But Ibelia wasn't easily swayed. Are you threatening me? That you'll harm my mother if I continue like this? The countess clarified. I mean, you should show some gratitude. This woman dared to target her only family. Ibelia, who usually wore a smile, hadn't smiled once in this room. She no longer even looked directly at the countess. Leave, she said, ignoring the woman's insults. If you dare to touch my mother, she warned, I won't let you get away with it. The usually cheerful Ibelia now regarded the countess with open disdain. The countess seethed, How dare you? But she was out of leverage. One more thing. You should let and go. With that, Ibelia turned and left without another word. She walked down the corridor, but suddenly stopped. I can't just sit back and do nothing. I have to go see Samuel. Ibelia spoke matter-of-factly and then headed into town. Inside a small house, a surprised voice exclaimed, How did you know about the effects of peach blossoms? Arya's cough has noticeably improved because of them. If they're that effective, how did you prove it? Samuel asked. Ibelia smiled. Prove it? Isn't your sister's health more important? You're right, Samuel said, looking down at the table, lost in thought. But wasn't there something you wanted to tell me? All right, the doctor you mentioned last time lives in the northern part of the capital. Ibelia knew that was quite a distance. I want to meet her. Is that all right? She asked. Samuel replied cheerfully, Of course, I'll guide you. By the way, the jewels you gave me last time have all been exchanged for cash. Here's the bank certificate. Samuel handed Ibelia a gold, embossed paper. Why are you giving me this? Ibelia asked, taking it. Samuel crossed his arms, a smile playing on his lips. This includes the value of the information you gave me. If it's the information's value, it's about the peach blossoms, right? If it's for my sister's life, it can't be overlooked. You're quite resolute, Samuel. However, I need to carve a name on the certificate. If it's all right, can I ask for your name? Ibelia, she said straightforwardly, feeling no need to hide it. Ibelia, what a lovely name. Suddenly, the certificate in Ibelia's hand began to glow. I cast a spell on this certificate, so you don't have to worry about losing it. Thank you. Though it's a bit cheeky, I have another request. I want to find someone today. Samuel didn't refuse. All right, tell me who it is. My mother. Her gaze grew heavy. Due to personal reasons, I have very little information on her. I don't even remember her name. I only know she has pink hair. That'll take a long time to find her, but we need to do it as soon as possible. Before they find out, the dreadful faces of the Van Eyne family flashed in Ibelia's mind. Do you have any other information? Samuel started to ask, but Ibelia cut him off. Earl Van Eyne. 20 years ago, my mother worked for Earl Van Eyne. We just need to trace her footsteps from then. The reward can be money, but I can also offer some other information as gratitude. Samuel was curious. What kind of information? Tell me first. I know a doctor who can treat your sister. She placed a hand on her chest, speaking with a confidence that inspired trust. Hearing this, Samuel's heart suddenly grew restless. He eagerly asked who it was, and Ibelia replied, It's the person I'm going to meet now. Ibelia arrived at a remote and quiet place in the northern part of the capital. There were only a few houses. She knocked on the door 3 times. Is anyone home? The small door slowly opened, and a rather young girl appeared, with a blonde ponytail and fashionable glasses. Who are you? Ibelia, with her attendant standing beside her, greeted her. Hello, are you Lona? Startled by the stranger at her door, asking for her by name, Lona asked, How do you know my name? Ibelia replied pleasantly, I heard there's a good doctor here, so I came. I have a request. Lona was surprised her reputation had spread so far, but she didn't mention it. Please come in first. They sat at a table, sipping tea. So, what do you want me to do? Ibelia got straight to the point. I want to sponsor you, Lona. This way, the medicine you make can be sold on the market. I heard you were looking for a sponsor to release the medicine, but Lona confessed honestly, lowering her gaze. Most sponsors before wanted to take most of the profit, so I'm tired of it. I don't want to deal with nobles anymore. It wasn't an unfamiliar situation to Ibelia. She realized she wasn't that different from those nobles, sponsoring someone for selfish reasons. Ibelia reassured her, I understand. I won't say I'm any different from other nobles. However, I'll fully respect your opinion, Lona. You can set the price of the medicine. Just give me 10% of the profit. I won't interfere with how you use the sponsorship money. Lona was puzzled by this noblewoman. Nobles usually pursued maximum profit. Why do you trust me so much? Ibelia added, on one condition. There's a child who needs your help. The person beside Ibelia was Samuel, who seemed to have dyed his hair black. He spoke to Lona, I want you to help my sister. She's been frail since birth, and even slight fatigue makes it hard for her to breathe. Even with the best heart medicine, I don't think it can fully cure her. Lona's eyes lit up when the illness was mentioned. She said, It's difficult to diagnose just by hearing about it. If possible, can I meet the child directly? Ibelia replied happily, Bring what you need, and let's meet at the Auto Manor. That way, you'll trust me more. Samuel looked at Ibelia and said, By the way, I also want to introduce you to my sister. Ibelia was a little surprised. What kind of child is Arya? She wondered. Despite never having met her, Ibelia imagined Arya must be a charming child, just like Ruth. Ibelia and Samuel sat in the carriage back to the capital. Inside the carriage, Ibelia thought Samuel really cares about his sister. It made sense. The Sela Guild was established to treat Arya. If Arya sees you, she might really like you, Samuel said, his face brimming with joy at the mention of his sister. He explained cheerfully, Arya is my younger sister. Because she's frail, she rarely sees outsiders. She'll be happy to meet you. I see, but Samuel wasn't finished. One more thing, Mississippi. You seem to like children, don't you? It seemed he saw a different side of Ibelia. But Ibelia denied it. It's not that I particularly like children. She looked up at the sky. But for Arya, I do feel a connection. She seemed pleased with the thought, because she's someone Ruth will love in the future. After a while, Ibelia and Samuel arrived at Samuel's residence. Samuel helped Ibelia down from the carriage. He led Ibelia inside, and the butler immediately bowed to greet his returning master. But when the butler looked up and saw the unfamiliar person, he asked, "Sir, who is the person behind you?" Samuel introduced her cheerfully. "This is my special guest." He gestured towards Ibelia. "She'll be visiting Arya often from now on, so take good care of her. Her name is—" He paused for a moment, then finally said, "Ibelia, perhaps next time we meet, I'll give you a bouquet of roses." Together, they pushed open the door to Arya's room. She sat inside alone, hugging a teddy bear, looking bored. She was surprised to see someone enter. It was Arya, Samuel's younger sister, with platinum blonde hair and golden eyes. As soon as she saw her brother Samuel, she rushed over to hug him, calling out sweetly, "Brother." Arya's quick movements made Ibelia think she's such a lively girl. Arya looked at Ibelia and asked her brother, "Who is this?" Samuel replied cheerfully, "She's—" Before Samuel could introduce her, Ibelia stepped forward. "Hello, I'm Ibelia." She crouched down to meet Arya's gaze. The little girl responded happily, "Ibelia, then can I call you Ibelia?" Ibelia was taken aback by the girl's friendly demeanor. "Of course." Then Arya became a little mischievous. "Are you my brother's girlfriend?" Everyone froze. A giant question mark hung in the air. Samuel stammered, "Where did you learn to say such things?" Arya replied, "From a book." He said, "Regardless, you shouldn't say such things to anyone. It's disrespectful to this lady." Arya's innocent, clear eyes questioned, "Then why are you here?" Samuel knelt down and said gently, "She's here to take you to the doctor." Arya pouted, "A doctor? I don't like doctors. It hurts every time I see one, and they always do weird things." Ibelia comforted her. "This doctor is a very kind person, so it won't be like that." Arya asked in surprise, "Really? She's not a scary person?" "Yes," Ibelia assured her, "I promise." Trusted by her brother, Arya didn't want to upset him anymore. She happily agreed and ran off, saying, "I'll go change my clothes and be right back. Wait for me." Samuel thought to himself, he was right, she really is good with children. Ibelia demurred. "It's just an adult's responsibility." Samuel said, "If everyone were like you, miss, the world would surely be a beautiful place." Sometimes, there were people at the clinic who wanted to use Arya for experiments, though those situations were always stopped in time. That was why Arya was always reluctant to see a doctor. But Ibelia trusted Lona. She knew Lona's character. She was kind and fond of children, so she would surely do her best to treat Arya. After a while, everyone gathered at the Otto Manor. Lona was taking Arya's pulse and couldn't help but exclaim, "Her pulse is too weak. How did the previous doctors diagnose her?" Samuel, his hair quickly dyed black to disguise himself as a servant, said, "Every doctor said something different, but many mentioned weak bronchial tubes." Lona replied, "It doesn't seem like a bronchial issue. Has she been taking any medication recently?" "She's been drinking water and eating food made with peach blossoms lately." Lona said in surprise, "That's a flower unique to this kingdom. It contains an energy component. Has it been effective?" "Yes," Samuel confirmed. "It's the most effective medicine she's used." Lona concluded, "Peach blossoms are mainly prescribed for young priests." "All right, I understand. For now, give her peach blossoms if there's a problem. I'll do more research and prescribe medicine accordingly." Just then, the door opened and Ruth said cheerfully, "Aunt Ibelia, where did you go?" But the room was full of strangers, and he began to fluster. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had guests." He bowed apologetically. Ibelia replied, "It's all right, young master. Come in." She introduced them. "This is my good friend, Samuel, and this is his younger sister, Arya." He bowed respectfully. "Hello, I'm Ruth Otto." Arya found the name odd. "Ruth? How old are you?" "I'm 7 years old." Arya exclaimed in surprise. "Really? I'm 7 too." Arya broke into a smile. "That's great. Since we're the same age, I really like you. I'm going to be your special friend." Ruth clasped his hands tightly, clearly thrilled at the prospect. "Really? You'll be my friend?" He bowed. "Actually, you're my first friend." Arya moved closer to Ruth. "It's a secret." She leaned in close to his ear, whispering, sounding quite shy. Ruth stood there motionless, listening to her like a statue, seemingly not yet at the age to develop romantic feelings. So he didn't blush. She confessed, "You're my first friend too." A dessert tower, piled high with luxurious noble sweets, sat nearby. "This is a cookie. Open your mouth." Ruth held the cookie out to Arya. This is my favorite cookie. Here, you have it, he said, feeding it to her. He was quite the gifted young boy. Arya, equally delighted to have found her first friend, exclaimed, "It's really delicious." Seeing the two children like this, the two adults were also pleased. Samuel said, "Look how captivated Arya is by the young master. Could I bring Arya here often?" "Of course, but you don't have to come often. Just send Arya over." Samuel's eyes moistened. "You're so mean," Ibelia said with a laugh. "I'm just kidding." Ibelia laughed heartily. "It's strange. Talking to Samuel makes me feel so relaxed. Have I laughed like this since becoming Ibelia Van Eyne?" Just then, Cassius walked into the room. "I heard we have guests." Upon seeing Duke Otto, Samuel greeted him. "It's been a while, Your Grace." The Duke, watching the two children play, was filled with questions. "Mr. Samuel, what brings you here?" Ibelia quickly explained, "I invited him. He personally helped me when I wasn't feeling well." "Personally? What kind of help?" This time, it was Samuel's turn to explain. "I merely helped the lady rest for a bit, as she was unwell." But seeing the Duke's tense expression, Samuel felt he might have been misunderstood. But that was all he knew. His gaze grew heavy, though it felt somewhat forced. Seeing the concern in his eyes, Ibelia said worriedly, "I apologize for inviting a guest without your permission. I'll ask first next time." He closed his eyes. "There's no need. Miss Ibelia is a member of the Otto family now, so you may act freely." But she didn't think she should be so presumptuous. Was Cassius being too lenient? Samuel noticed the atmosphere between them growing thick with tension. "Please don't put me in such a frosty space." He had an idea. "Arya was born before the Duke, wasn't she? It's fate that you've met like this. You should go greet him." Samuel urged Arya to run over and greet Cassius, hoping to diffuse the tension he sensed. "Arya, go say hello to the Duke." She replied cheerfully, "Okay," and immediately ran to Cassius. "Greetings, Your Grace." She confidently greeted him with noble etiquette, appearing quite proper. "I'm Arya." He looked at her cheerful face, but said nothing. Finally, he closed his eyes. "You should rest. I have matters to attend to." Ibelia seized the opportunity to ask, "Your Grace, before you go, may I ask something?" "Ruth enjoys playing with Arya very much, so may I bring her here often?" He didn't refuse. "Yes, since it's Samuel, I trust him. I'll have the butler take good care of both of them. Now I must be off." Ibelia thought. Although he said it wasn't necessary, he clearly seemed uncomfortable. Indeed, back in his office, his expression darkened with anger, but he could do nothing. The butler, noticing this, thought the reason for his frustration must be hearing about the commotion caused by Countess Van Eyne. "I intended to keep this secret for the rest of my life." He quickly spoke, "I'm sorry, Your Grace." Cassius asked, "Why are you suddenly apologizing?" The butler explained, "This morning, Lady Van Eyne came here and caused a scene. Aren't you upset because of that? You only want to know if Lady Van Eyne is well." "Yes, fortunately, she's been handled well." Good. Don't let something like that happen again. By the way, what are those documents?" He pointed to a large stack of files, thick as dictionaries. "This is the investigation you requested earlier regarding the relationship between the Sicia royal family and Countess Van Eyne. Recently, due to the Empire's increased demand for magic, both the royal family and Countess Van Eyne have been actively cooperating. It seems both sides have been interacting. Prince Leon, who joined the Royal Academy 14 years ago, graduated 8 years ago. After returning to the Empire, he wasn't seen in public for a year. There are rumors that the Sicia Emperor imprisoned him during that time. Around this time, there are records of Countess Van Eyne visiting the Sicia Empire. Prince Leon imprisoned, Countess Van Eyne coming to the Sicia Empire. This means Prince Leon is indeed Ruth's biological father. If my deduction is correct, there's one more thing. Speak quickly. It's said that during that year of absence, Prince Leon's golden hair turned white. He was of good physique, but appeared thin due to weight loss. People speculated he was tortured for rebellious thoughts. However, there haven't been any reports of suicide so far, so the rumor may be unfounded. Cassius thought, if the imprisonment rumors are true, then he surely couldn't have met Julia. The young butler asked, "What should we do next?" Cassius, his hands resting on the table, looked grave. "Investigate whether there are any curses within the Sicia royal family, and ensure no one knows about this investigation." At the Van Eyne estate, Countess Van Eyne returned and spoke to Count Van Eyne. "Ibelia has become quite strange. She dared to send me away instead of inviting me in. She felt offended and wanted the Count to confront her. Moreover, she threatened me about dismissing her maid. You must do something quickly. Are you going to let her behave this way?" He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking up at the sky but it was difficult to remain calm. Duke Audle's letter was already strange. I've been controlling the narrative when it comes to Ruth's real father. Someone who endured and agreed to the engagement suddenly changed his attitude like this. Ibelia must have used some kind of trickery. He was convinced that Cassius was being manipulated by the daughter he was raising. He thought he was raising an obedient child, but it turned out he'd raised a tiger cub. Turning around, he raised his voice. I will not let her get away with this. I'll find a way. He extended his hand, and a stranger in a black suit suddenly appeared. Sir, what are your orders? Go and seize her mother quickly. He was referring to Ibelia's mother. It was a beautiful day. Ruth cheerfully opened the door. Arya, come in. Arya crossed her arms haughtily. I didn't come because I missed you. I came to see Miss Ibelia. Ibelia smiled silently to herself, knowing that Arya was the one who truly wanted to see Ruth. But look at her now, Samuel said. Arya insisted on coming to the manor to play, so I apologize. Ibelia replied with a smile. It's all right. Ruth wanted to see Arya too. Just then, Ruth asked with a puzzled look, but why do you call Aunt Ibelia sister? Arya replied, because she's like a sister. Ruth hesitated. I don't know. Then can I call Aunt Ibelia Aunt Ivy? Ibelia, slightly dazed, replied with a smile, of course. Ruth was overjoyed upon hearing this. Then he shouted, Aunt Ivy. He didn't quiet down until Arya scolded, You're too loud. Don't do that. As Ibelia watched the two children happily, she heard Samuel ask, Miss, could I speak with you for a moment? A short while later, the two left the children playing in the garden and sat at a tea table. Samuel spoke seriously. I found the person you mentioned. The place you used to live was a village in the O'Quinn territory. Ibelia thought, O'Quinn, that's not unfamiliar. It's a place recorded in my memories. She spoke. All right, so did you find my mother's whereabouts? Samuel nodded. Yes, I did. Your mother is... The scene shifted and a memory flashed in Ibelia's mind. When she was young, she often called out for her mother. Then she would run to embrace her joyfully. Her mother would ask gently, My Ivy, did you have fun playing with your friends on the beach? Are you hungry, dear? Ibelia felt warmth. She knew it was just a dream, but it was a past she longed for, a warmth she had never truly experienced, making her reluctant to wake up. Just then, the call of Miss pulled her back to reality. The maid, who had opened the curtains, turned and asked, Miss, are you all right? It seemed like you had a rather unpleasant dream. Ibelia replied, Yes, just a little. The maid added, I think your mood will improve soon, as the weather is lovely today. Just then, footsteps sounded from outside, and the maid entered to announce, Excuse me, miss, someone has come to see you. Ibelia asked, Who is it? Who would come looking for me? The maid replied, No matter how many times I asked, the person wouldn't reveal their identity, but she's a woman with pink hair. Outside, two guards were struggling to hold back the pink-haired woman. As soon as she saw Ibelia coming down, the woman called out, Ibelia. Ibelia said to the guards, Let her in, it's all right. The woman reached out to her affectionately, crying out, Ibelia, my dear daughter. She touched her face without hesitation, asking tenderly, Have you been well? You look just like you did when you were little. Ibelia answered coldly, Then why are you here? The woman replied, I heard from Count Van Eyne that you're getting married. He's very upset that you came here before the wedding. Ibelia, my dear daughter. Ibelia thought silently. It's been so long since I've heard the word mother that yearning could surface at any moment. She wanted to hold on to this person to talk a little longer. The woman asked her if she was well, mentioning that her mother had been ill the last time they met. But just then, Ibelia coldly pushed her hand away. The woman's face paled, but she forced a smile and called out again, Ibelia. Ibelia responded coldly, My mother always called me Ivy. So I want to ask again, are you truly my mother? The woman tried to explain. Of course. Don't you remember me? It's been so long since you've seen your mother. Ibelia sighed wearily and turned to the butler. There's an imposter here. Take this person away. The woman's face drained of color. Ivy, why are you doing this? Why are you speaking to your mother this way? The butler asked hesitantly, Miss, are you truly all right? Just in case, Ibelia closed her eyes and replied, I'm fine. She recalled the information Samuel had given her yesterday, telling her that her mother had passed away 14 years ago. Ibelia gripped her skirt, finding it hard to believe. The Count had sent a physician after all. Samuel had sternly replied, Count Van Eyne didn't send any physician. Ibelia realized she had been deceived by Count Van Eyne all along. Today, she could calmly state, My mother has already passed away. The woman, now exposed, pleaded fearfully, I only did as Count Van Eyne told me. Please spare me. Ibelia walked inside and ordered the butler, Prepare the carriage. I'm going to Count Van Eyne's estate. A short while later, the carriage brought her to the gates of the manor. Ibelia slowly walked in, determined to go there and bring her maid back if they hadn't sent someone. Just then, someone standing upstairs asked in confusion, "Who is that?" It was Ibelia. Derek, grinding his teeth in anger, demanded, "Why is she here, looking like that?" He glared. "Why is she here, looking like that?" Derek rushed out to confront Ibelia. "I heard what you did to my mother. You kicked her out, saying she was an uninvited guest, didn't you? How dare you?" His expression looked as if he wanted to swallow Ibelia whole. Ibelia countered fearlessly. She was indeed an uninvited guest. Besides, haven't you always treated me this way? She took a step forward, glaring at him. "So you want to welcome this guest now? Be careful. If you fall down the stairs again, it won't just be your leg that gets injured." Derek lost his composure, grabbing her shoulder and yelling, "You think you can treat me like this and get away with it?" Ibelia shrugged and replied, "We'll see." She continued, "I never said that. You're the one who should be careful of me. In a few months, I will be the Duchess of Autolonia. So if you want to speak properly with your sister, you need to take care of yourself." Elsewhere, Annie was busy hanging laundry. Ibelia called out to her, startling her. "Miss, what are you doing here?" Ibelia took her hand. "Let's go." Annie followed, confused. "Go where?" Ibelia smiled. "I'll explain later. Let's go to the Otto Manor first." The two girls walked out of the estate hand in hand. They soon reached the waiting carriage. Ibelia pushed Annie towards the carriage. "You get in first." Annie hesitated but complied. Just then, a man appeared, asking, "What's this commotion?" It was Count Van Eyne. Ibelia greeted him with a polite smile. "It's been a while, Count. I came to retrieve my maid. It seems you've forgotten your promise." Count Van Eyne sneered. "You came for a maid, not to see your father?" Ibelia replied coldly. "I don't even know who my father is anymore, since I was never treated like his daughter. But if you wish, I'll offer my greetings." Count Van Eyne glared at her furiously. Ibelia cut him off icily. "I've received the gift you sent. Was that my mother?" Count Van Eyne asked, "What do you mean? Can't you even recognize your own mother?" Ibelia replied, "Count Van Eyne, 14 years ago, when I came to this estate with you, you promised to send a physician to see my mother." Van Eyne nodded. "Yes." Ibelia immediately countered, "But you didn't send anyone. I learned this from a reliable source, so don't deny it. You didn't keep your promise to send a physician, so I have no reason to stay in this house any longer." Van Eyne sneered. "No, you're not my daughter." Ibelia simply offered a cold smile. "I've said this before. You've never treated me like your daughter." She recalled him coldly saying, "If you want to be my daughter, you must become a perfect noble." She had naively agreed. "Yes, father." She had thought that by coming here, she could save her mother, believing that when she grew up, she could help her reunite with her. Ibelia thought self-deprecatingly. She had endured everything, clinging to that hope. She continued coldly, "There's nothing left between me and Van Eyne, so don't contact me again." That night, Van Eyne stared silently out the window, lost in thought. Where did she get the information about her mother? He wondered. If she hadn't known, I could have held her weakness over her at any time. Could it be Cassius Autolonia? No, why would he do that? He wouldn't interfere for Ibelia. Then who? No, what's important now isn't where she got the information, but that the girl I've always controlled can now run to Autolonia at any moment. Before that, with that thought, he rang the bell. His subordinate immediately appeared, bowing. "Yes, master." "Tell me," Van Eyne commanded, "call Catherine to the capital immediately." He calculated silently. If that pawn couldn't be used, he'd have to switch to another, even if it wasn't Ibelia. There were plenty of others who could take her place as the Duchess of Autolonia. Meanwhile, Ibelia stood alone in the courtyard. Closing her eyes, she felt the wind on her face and thought that, according to Ibelia's memories, her mother's embrace smelled of roses. She remembered her saying, "My daughter is so beautiful." Ibelia thought, "That's not my memory. Then why am I tears falling?" Just then, a sound from behind made her turn around. Cassius had appeared beside her unnoticed. Noticing Ibelia's dazed expression, he draped a cloak over her shoulders, murmuring, "It's cold today." Cassius asked, "Has anything else happened at this hour? Did Count Van Eyne come again today?" The subordinate replied, "No, he did not." Cassius asked, puzzled, "Then what is it?" The subordinate said, "I already told you about this morning's events. Ibelia's birth mother came, but it was a fake. Her real mother passed away 14 years ago." There was an agreement between the Count and Ibelia. Cassius listened intently. His expression was serious. Then, nodding, he asked, "I understand. How is Miss Van Eyne?" The subordinate said, "She hasn't eaten and has been staying in her room." Cassius asked again. And you've just left her like that? The subordinate answered awkwardly. Many maids have taken food to her, but she refused it all. Cassius replied softly, I understand. I'll go now. Then he went to his study to review some unfinished documents. He was surprised to hear footsteps, wondering where she would be going so early. Now they walked together. Ibelia's shoes were uncomfortable, and she regretted not changing them indoors. Cassius kept glancing at her. Then he suddenly spoke. My mother passed away from malaria 10 years ago. Even though I sent many physicians, I couldn't save her. Ibelia thought silently. This story didn't suit Cassius's character at all. Why would he suddenly bring up his mother? Had he heard about what happened earlier? If so, perhaps he was comforting her in his own way. After all, he was good at comforting people. But then she dismissed the thought. No, maybe I'm mistaken. Why would he comfort me? He's always looked down on me. But if he really was comforting her, she thought, if only that were meant to comfort me. Hesitantly, she asked, were you comforting me? Cassius remained silent, turning his head to avoid her gaze. Ibelia continued, if it was meant as comfort, you needn't have. I wasn't terribly shocked, but thank you for trying to comfort me. It makes me feel a little better. I think I can sleep more soundly now, so I'll be returning to my room. Good night, Your Grace. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Cassius alone in the garden. He thought, thank you for comforting her. She's stronger than anyone, with a mind of her own. Yet, she doesn't cherish her own well-being, unexpectedly fragile, so much so that I want to protect her, to stop her tears from falling again. The thought startled him. Do I want to protect her? Cassius's face flushed crimson. The next day, Ibelia went alone to a house in town. Upon entering, the proprietor noticed her. He greeted her. You've come. Slightly surprised, Ibelia asked, were you waiting for me? The proprietor stroked his chin. Not waiting, precisely. I simply anticipated you would come soon. This way, please. He offered her a glass of cold water. Please, have a seat here. Ibelia sat politely, offering a small smile. Thank you. Observing her, the proprietor rested his chin in his hand. Are you all right? Regarding the information you told me a few days ago, Ibelia replied with a gentle smile. I'm trying to compose myself, but I wasn't too surprised. I had already guessed part of it. When my mother and I were separated, I was heartbroken. I doubted her survival even with a physician, but I didn't know he hadn't sent anyone at all. The proprietor responded sympathetically. I understand. So, what brings you here today? Ibelia answered, I came here today to find my mother's grave. The proprietor said nothing at first, then rummaged through something before handing her an old envelope. Curious, Ibelia asked, what is this? The proprietor said, I've located your mother's burial site. This location, it's where you lived as a child. Ibelia looked down, a wave of emotion washing over her that she tried to suppress. Her voice trembled. Thank you. I believe in the Morning Information Association's abilities, but I didn't expect it to be this fast. The proprietor wiped a tear from her cheek. He smiled. We only do this for special clients. If you ever need anything, feel free to come here. Upon returning, Ibelia sought out Cassius and found him in the courtyard. Do you have a moment? I'd like to speak with you. It's nothing too serious. Cassius nodded. Certainly. Let's talk inside. The weather's getting colder. Ibelia was surprised to hear this. Oh, it seems we've grown a bit closer. Once inside the warmth of the room, Cassius asked, so, what did you wish to discuss? Ibelia spoke frankly. I would like to employ the chief physician. Cassius inquired why. Are the physicians of this ducal estate not trustworthy? Ibelia quickly waved her hand in explanation. No, it's not that. I simply wish to sponsor a physician. And it's not that I want to employ or command her. I want her to be my personal physician. I'm requesting permission because she will be frequenting this estate. Cassius remained silent, seemingly in thought. Ibelia anxiously awaited his response, thinking, of course, he won't agree immediately. But if Lorna can come frequently, and Arya also visits the ducal estate often, then Ruth and Arya can meet sooner than in the original story, and their love will blossom more quickly. That's right, my ambitions include their love too. Just as she was thinking this, Cassius suddenly spoke. Understand. You may do as you wish. Ibelia spoke quickly. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, I'll be going out tomorrow. Cassius nodded. You're free to do as you please. You don't require my permission. Ibelia explained, I know. I'm saying I intend to be away for a day and a night. Cassius asked her, where are you going? Ibelia replied, you must have heard. My mother's grave is in the village where I lived as a child. So, I thought I'd try to visit it. Cassius suggested, let us send bodyguards with you. Ibelia interrupted, there's no need for guards. I'll be going with Annie. I don't think anyone would target me. Cassius replied, Ibelia, you are the future Duchess of Audle, so I will accompany you. Ibelia said, surprised. What? I'd much rather have a guard. Cassius asked, are you uncomfortable with me? Ibelia said, Your Grace, that's not the issue. Cassius responded, if that's not it, then let me go with you. I also want to fulfill my responsibilities as your soon-to-be family. Ibelia fell silent, thinking, why is this happening? It's just a contractual marriage. Soon, the next morning arrived. Ruth hesitantly approached Ibelia. Can I go with you? Ibelia replied, although I can use a magic portal, I've chosen to travel by carriage, so it will take a long time and be tiring. Ruth hesitated, the young boy sadly lowering his head, thinking how much he wanted to go out with her, his father, and Ibelia. Noticing his expression, Ibelia turned to Annie. Annie, please take good care of the young master. Ruth asked, surprised, can I go too? Ibelia smiled. Yes, Your Grace. Ruth and I have never traveled together before. Hearing this, Ruth couldn't hide his joy. He quickly ran off, saying, okay, I'll go get ready and be right back. Ibelia smiled, thinking this is a good opportunity to get closer to Cassius. His voice startled her. Be careful, my lady. By now, the three of them had boarded the carriage. Ibelia said, Annie and Logan will follow later, so let's depart for now. The carriage, carrying the three of them, began to move. It quickly disappeared through the magic portal. They arrived swiftly. Arriving at a small village, a servant said, please transfer to this carriage. So they changed carriages and continued on their journey. Ibelia leaned back against the seat, tiredly complaining to herself. The local carriages are so tiring. She turned to Ruth. Young master, you must be tired. But Ruth brightly replied, no, I'm having fun. Ibelia smiled, thinking, at least Ruth is enjoying himself. This isn't just about seeing his mother, but why do I feel so conflicted? Just then, the carriage hit a rock, momentarily losing her balance. A familiar romantic movie scene unfolded as Cassius quickly grabbed her hand. She bumped against his chest as he murmured, it's all right now. When she looked up, they were in a decidedly romantic pose, gazing at each other for a moment. Cassius's face slowly turned red. Ibelia stared intently at him, thinking his eyes are beautiful.